Hello everyone. Welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. Central High School, Knoxville, Tennessee. The football stadium lights up and the energy is high. As everyone turns up to support their home team, the Bobcats. The marching band and cheerleaders keep the entertainment going and the energy up for the crowd. Some say the school revolves around football, and the community spirit is always strong when the team plays. In the autumn of 2014, there was a new cheerleader on the team. 14-year-old Emma Walker was the only freshman to make the team that year. Described as passionate, spirited, and fun with an infectious smile, Emma threw herself into cheerleading and took it very seriously. She adored being in that environment. She was kind, caring, and high-achieving with hopes of one day becoming a neonatal nurse, caring for sick or premature newborn babies. One evening while Emma was cheering, she caught the attention of Central High's wide receiver, William Riley Gall, known as Riley. He spotted her from the sidelines, and the attraction between the pair was instant. Riley, 2 years her senior, was also a top-performing and popular student. He was a member of the community church, loved video games, and his friends said he was a bit of a joker and not at all the stereotypical jock type. At the time, Riley was already in a relationship, but he soon broke it off to begin dating Emma. The football star and cheerleader became the quintessential popular high school couple. Riley clicked with Emma's family. Her parents said he was like the boy next door, polite, well-mannered, and likable. But their attitude quickly changed when they found out that Riley was keeping his promise to take his ex-girlfriend to the junior year prom, and then he was taking Emma to the senior year prom. This didn't sit well with Emma's parents, and they were concerned that his priorities didn't lie with their daughter. But Emma wasn't concerned. Her social media account was often flooded with pictures of the young couple. The pair would upload loving photos and silly selfies. Emma's friends, however, said they didn't find it easy to get to know Riley, but thought this was down to him being shy and more reserved. But as time passed, friends of Emma said they stopped justifying his behavior and started to find it a bit more concerning. Many of Emma's friends said it became obvious that Riley didn't want Emma engaging with anyone that wasn't him. He became controlling, possessive, and jealous. Emma's friends voiced their concerns, but Emma brushed it off and told them they didn't need to worry. Emma's parents took away her phone in a bid to stop the toxicity. But Riley gave Emma an iPod Touch, so she was able to secretly text him through the Wi-Fi without her parents suspecting anything. For the next 2 years, Emma and Riley would be on and off numerous times, and the relationship was becoming more toxic and tumultuous. Each breakup was more dramatic than the last, and the young pair would frequently get into nasty arguments. Riley would send message after message and call her constantly. He was always bombarding her, waiting outside her work for hours until she finished. He once said to her, but for every nasty message, it would soon be followed by an apology. Emma's parents, Mark and Jill, said they tried to convince Emma to break off the relationship many times. Jill said he had a way of isolating her and making her think that he was the only one. The more they told Emma to break it off, the more they all butted heads. By the autumn of 2016, to everyone's unease, Emma and Riley's relationship was still the same. Riley had graduated and was a freshman at Vol.40 College about 30 minutes away. And 16-year-old Emma was in her junior year of high school. Around Halloween that year, in a desperate bid to help their daughter, Emma's parents decided to ground her, not allowing her to leave the house unless it was to go to school or cheerleading. They started monitoring everywhere she went and everyone she spoke to. And to their surprise, it seemed to have the positive effect they were hoping for. Mark said she was like her old self again. She would spend time with the family, socializing and eating dinner with everyone. Emma had even texted her friend Keegan to say that she and Riley were done for good after she had seen pictures of him with other girls at college. Keegan and other friends breathed a sigh of relief. As everyone expected, Riley did not take the breakup well. Friday, November 18, 2016, Emma was allowed out to go to a gathering at a friend's house. At around 11:30 p.m., her friend Zach arrived at the house. He was met by Emma, who quickly pulled him inside. She told him she had been receiving strange text messages from a number she didn't know. One of the messages said, "Come outside alone if you don't want to see a loved one get hurt. Go to your car with your keys. If you don't comply, I will hurt them." Emma thought it was one of Riley's friends playing a prank on her. She texted back, threatening to call the police. This didn't deter anything, and the messages got more disturbing. Emma then got a message saying Riley had been dropped outside the house. Emma and Zach ran outside and sure enough they saw someone lying face down in a ditch near the house. It was Riley. When the pair reached him, he was holding his head and seemed confused. He said he had been kidnapped and didn't know how he got there. Emma was crying and told Riley they had broken up and he needed to leave her alone. Dejected, Riley walked off down the street alone. He then called his friend Noah, telling him he had been kidnapped. Noah didn't believe a word. Emma, feeling uneasy, stayed with her friends that night. The following morning, just after 10 a.m., she drove home with her friend Haley, who lived close to the Walkers. While driving, they spotted a man dressed all in black walking around on Emma's street. Emma dropped Haley at her house and drove back home herself. Emma was going to meet her mom, Jill, and started getting ready inside, but the mystery man soon came back and started ringing the doorbell and banging on the door. Emma was frantic and texted her friends. She also messaged the one person she believed would come to her rescue, Riley. She said, "I hate you, but I need you right now." He replied, saying he was speeding over to help her. When Riley arrived, the mystery man had disappeared. Emma's friend, Haley, knew who the man was. She said there was no doubt it was Riley. This was also confirmed when she saw his car parked nearby. She even texted Riley asking what he was doing lurking around near Emma's house, but Riley denied it was him. Jill Walker returned home looking for Emma. She found her daughter and Riley talking in the front yard. Jill reminded him he wasn't allowed to come near the house and told him to leave. Emma was visibly shaken and was worried. It could have been a burglar. Jill wasn't convinced and knew this wasn't a coincidence, but Emma reassured Jill she knew Riley had nothing to do with what happened. After this incident, Jill and Mark were so concerned for their daughter, they took her to work on her Sunday morning shift. They waited until she'd finished and drove back home with her. Sunday night, November 20th, 2016. Everything in the Walker household appeared quiet and calm. Emma spoke to her friend Keegan about an assignment that was due and then headed for bed. Around midnight. A few minutes past midnight, Riley, who was back in Marville, asked to borrow his roommate's phone. Using this phone, he called Emma. Riley alleged that during this call, Emma had told him she had no interest in getting back together with him, and the conversation abruptly ended. After this, Riley sent her countless texts and called around 40 times, leaving numerous voicemails. Emma didn't respond, and Riley eventually stopped trying to make contact. During the night, Emma's dad woke up after hearing what sounded like someone in the house and a door slamming twice. He checked around, looking in Emma and her brother Evan's bedrooms, but he couldn't see or hear anything, and nothing seemed disturbed. Thinking he'd just imagined the sounds, he went back to bed. Around 6 a.m., Jill went into Emma's room to wake her up for school. Jill said her name, but Emma didn't respond. She reached out and touched her leg, but Emma still didn't move. When Jill looked at Emma's face, she said she knew she needed to call an ambulance. Emma was pale and her lips were blue. Jill checked for a pulse, but felt nothing. 16-year-old Emma Walker was dead. Police soon arrived at the Walker house. A small amount of blood was near Emma's mouth, and it as though she may have vomited, possibly due to ingesting something. However, police noticed a small hole in the wall of Emma's bedroom, which pointed them elsewhere. It was a bullet hole. Someone had shot Emma in the head through the wall while she was sleeping. 2 shell casings were found outside the home and police needed to work out where the second shot was fired. Walking around the outside of the house, police eventually found the second bullet hole at approximately the same height as the first. This shot was also fired into Emma's bedroom just by her bed. The gunshots had been fired from as close as 4 or 5 feet from Emma's bedroom window between 2:30 and 3 a.m. One bullet had hit her behind her left ear, likely killing her instantly. And the second bullet had lodged in her pillow. Whoever the shooter was knew the layout of the room and knew the position Emma would be lying in. Hundreds of tributes came flooding in, including many from Emma's ex-boyfriend, Riley. A candlelight vigil was held at Central High, and her fellow cheerleaders released balloons in her memory at that week's football game. When police started interviewing Emma Walker's friends and family, the same name kept coming up over and over: Riley Gall. Some of Riley's friends became concerned for his well-being after Emma's passing. They told detectives a secret Riley had shared the day after he claimed he was kidnapped. Riley said he was now fearing for his life and had taken his grandfather's gun for protection. He then showed the gun to his friend, Alex. Another friend, Noah, told detectives that Riley had asked him how to remove fingerprints from a gun, claiming he was asking for his roommate. Just the day before Emma was shot, Riley's grandfather reported this very gun as stolen. Riley asked Noah and Alex if they would help him get rid of the Gun in the Tennessee River, as he feared it may implicate him in some way, even though he claimed he had absolutely nothing to do with Emma's death. Detectives brought Riley in for questioning. "How do you know that?" "They're looking for you." "I understand that. How would that be so loud if I walked in there in person?" "That would certainly not be enough, right?" "But they're saying that there are text messages and phone calls to and from." "That's going to help establish your timeline." "That's what it says." "What I can't care less about you thinking I've done everything, but I owe it to God. I'm not a suspect in there yet. That's what I'm hoping I'll find out, because I wouldn't be perfect." Police talked to him for hours that day. The more Riley talked, the more holes appeared in his story. He was elusive and detached, and the way he spoke about Emma did not match with his previous words. He referred to Emma as the girl and wouldn't use her name. Detectives said Riley was totally emotionless and disconnected, and his whole story seemed very rehearsed. "The girl she texted me." "Which girl?" "The one that passed away." "Oh, okay. Which Emma?" "Emma." Despite maintaining he'd been in Ville at the time Emma had been killed, cell phone analysis proved this to be a lie. His phone placed him on the freeway around midnight heading back to Knoxville from Ville. It also put Riley in the vicinity of Emma's address at around 3:45 a.m. and she had been killed between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Officers quizzed him on the gun and the information they had received from Noah and Alex, but Riley denied any of these conversations ever happened. Riley was the police's only suspect at this point, but they did not have enough to make an arrest. After he got out of the station, Riley sent Noah and Alex a text message and told them not to talk to the police again, and instructed them to delete the messages from him. Little did Riley know, Alex and Noah were still talking with officers and had been the second they found out Emma had died. The pair wanted to support the investigation and knew they could retrieve the murder weapon. Police were initially hesitant and warned them about the safety risks of getting involved, but the pair were both adamant and determined to help. "I wasn't fearful of my safety. I was just fearful that maybe justice couldn't have been done if we made the wrong move," Alex said. They hatched a plan with the police to catch Riley in his own lies. Noah and Alex spoke to Riley and agreed to help him dispose of his grandfather's gun in the Tennessee River. The plan was the police would wait nearby, ready to arrest Riley as soon as he pulled the gun out. The boys would text the police a code word, signaling them to move in. Officers gave Noah and Alex wires and body cameras, and an intricate undercover investigation began. "My grandfather had a gun. His magazine had 5 shots in total. When I first got it still has 5 shots in it. I actually gave him that gun at best. Like, yeah, maybe it's 50-50. It may give them reason to say, okay, the fingerprints on his gun and his bullet don't match. Cool. But at the same time, they could have never had fingerprints in the first place. It'd be like, oh, and it's just this little this walks into a stupid moment. This or this bullet fits in this magazine. This magazine fits in this gun." After this was filmed, the three made their way to the river with the gun that Riley had been hiding at his stepfather's house. Success. "I just threw it in there. I don't know what's in there. I just want to throw it and be done. Oh my God. This is a real gun. When they got there, Riley took out the gun, ready to throw it in. But thanks to Noah and Alex, the police were waiting. "Everybody put your hands out the car." "What the F *****************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************
What the F asterisk asterisk K? Put your hands out the car. What the F? Asterisk asterisk K? Leave your hands out of the vehicle. OF asterisk asterisk K. Step out of the vehicle. 48 hours after Emma had been found, her killer was in handcuffs. Riley Gall was charged with the murder of Emma Walker. In the boot of Riley's car, police found black clothing and shoes. The only conclusion they could draw was that it had definitely been Riley trying to get into Emma's house a few days earlier. Opening arguments began today in the first-degree murder trial. Aaron Brock was there today. A lot of emotions surrounding this case. Some tough talk, though, as well, about evidence and patterns of behavior. You picked it all up, and absolutely emotional, of course, as a mother had to be the first witness to take the stand and describe so much surrounding her daughter's death. But both sides in this case really dug in, trying to show behavior patterns. The defense trying to bring out details of how this teenage girl you see pictured behind me was defying her parents even when they didn't want her around. Her boyfriend trying to show that while he was what the defense even called obsessive in his behavior, he did not intend to harm her. Now prosecutors are trying to show that Gall was stalking his former girlfriend, even planning to harm her, pointing to evidence from the gun they say Riley stole from his grandfather to having a bag full of black clothes and gloves in a garbage bag. Police collecting these things when they arrested him. The trial of Riley Gall began a year and a half later, and he pled not guilty. He chose not to testify, and his legal team called no witnesses to the stand. His team's line of attack was not to argue that he didn't fire the bullets, but to argue that it was a total accident that the bullets had killed her. They claimed he was just trying to scare Emma by shooting near her without realizing the bullets would go through the wall. He wanted her to confide in him and ultimately resume the relationship. His lawyer said Emma saw Riley as her hero, and this was all part of his clumsy plan to pretend to save her, but it went horribly wrong when he accidentally killed her in the process. The defense asked the jury if they were to find him guilty of anything. It was reckless homicide, which carried a substantially lesser sentence. So submit to you that after you've heard all the evidence, and as I told you in the very beginning of this trial, you will hear some bizarre reckless conduct regarding my teenage client, that everything that they say about premeditation to kill Emma Walker is consistent with him trying to scare her. Because if you scare her, maybe she'll come have contact with you, and therefore you can try to rehabilitate your relationship. I'm not saying it's logical. Do not think that I submit to you that there's any logic in any of this, because it's not logical. None of it is. But it is consistent with the facts as we know them from the witnesses. It's consistent with the facts as we know them from the and it's consistent with how Emma reached out to him on the night, asked him to rescue her. But the prosecution said everything pointed to this being an intentional act, and it stemmed from his anger at her not wanting to get back together with him. But she was their light, and they're blessed that they got 16 years with her. And they can look at it that way and live the rest of their lives knowing at least we got that. But they'll always be muted. You can sense that from them when they took the stand. Each one of them has suffered a loss at the hands of him. This guy, his personal responsibility,
his actions, everything that he did caused them to suffer. And every person in here who she touched in their lives will never do the same again because of him and his selfishness and his lies, his possessiveness and his manipulation and this obsessiveness of Emma Walker's actions, creating this fictitious, this bogus kidnapping story to upset her. When you think about the fact that 3 o'clock in the morning, dressed in black, he's standing outside a 16-year-old girl's bedroom. And you think of all the places he could have placed that shot, all the things that he could have done. Shoot up into the air, shoot him through the window, anywhere. But where are you shot? Shot placement shows you an attempt to kill. Mr. Gildner, has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, sir, we have. Will you please stand? Mr. Gall. Please stand. Mr. Gildner, a count on the first defined offense, charging the defendant with first-degree murder. Did the jury reach a verdict? Yes, we did. What is your verdict? Guilty. And for the lesser included offense of stalking, did the jury reach a verdict? We did. What is your verdict? Guilty. The jury found William Riley Gall guilty of the first-degree murder of Emma Walker, as well as stalking, theft, reckless endangerment, and being in possession of a firearm during a dangerous felony. I know that nothing I can do will ever bring Emma back or alleviate the pain that I've caused. But what I can do is tell the truth of what happened that night. My intentions were not and never have been to cause Emma any physical harm. At times, I wasn't her boyfriend. I caused her emotional and psychological pain during the 2 years that we were together. But I never once even imagined it caused her any physical harm. My intentions that night were never to harm Emma, let alone take her life. I wanted to scare her, to frighten her so bad that she would have no choice but to talk to me again, to confide in me. I would be there to comfort her and to win her back. In the state of Tennessee, a first-degree murder conviction carries an automatic life sentence. Riley was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 51 years before he could even be considered for parole. He will be in his 70s. In May 2021, it was announced that Riley Gall was seeking an acquit based on insufficient evidence. If the acquit was not granted, he was seeking a new trial. A motion hearing was set for June 4, 2021. However, his request was denied. Riley's attorney said he plans to appeal the ruling. Emma should have graduated in May 2018. Her family accepted her diploma for her, and her cap and gown were laid out on the chair she would have been sat in. Since her death, Emma's family and friends continue to work hard to keep her legacy alive. Her high school has a scholarship in her name. Jill said Emma's love of animals and her dreams of becoming a neonatal nurse were such big parts of her character. The Walker family has since had a dog park and a neonatal intensive care unit patient room at East Tennessee Children's Hospital named after her. Jill said that she hopes people remember Emma by channeling her energy and making sure they are always kind to others. Story 2. The commission of a series of intentional and brutal killings of 5 members of a family, including 2 children in their family home in the early hours of the morning whilst they were sleeping or being roused from sleep. In a single episode of brutal and calculated murderous violence is a course of offending that can only be described as heinous in the extreme. Min and his wife Yunlin, known as Lily, were doing parents, loving partners, and a hard-working couple. The pair had met in Sydney after migrating from China as students. They soon married and had 3 children, 2 sons, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, and an older daughter, Brenda, who was 15. Brenda described her mother and father as very loving, attentive, and extremely hard-working, giving everything they could to their children. 12-year-old Henry loved sports, was a keen badminton player, and was very popular and outgoing. The youngest of the family, Terry, adored his older siblings, and used to follow Brenda around everywhere. The Lin family were very close, and the siblings shared a particularly tight bond. Min and Lily worked hard to give their 3 children the best life and education they possibly could. Min set up the Epping Central News Agency in 2002, which became a fast-growing and lucrative business, turning over more than $1 million a year. The news agency was always bustling and busy, and the Lin family quickly became very well known and respected within the local community. The family lived on Boundary Road in a nice suburb of North Epping. Lily's sister, Irene, also moved into Boundary Road with them. Irene worked part-time at the news agency to help Min and Lily. Min had bought his parents, Yang Flynn and Fuan Ju, a new home about a 30-minute drive away from them. Min and Lily also lived a short walk away from Min's sister Kathy, her husband, Liam Beanshi, known as Robert, who was previously an ear, nose, and throat specialist in, and their son. Both Robert and Kathy migrated to Australia in 2002. On Friday, July 17, the Lin family went to Min and Kathy's parents' house for dinner. This was a regular weekly gathering, and everyone apart from Brenda was there as she was away on a school excursion. Henry's grandmother asked him to stay over that night. However, he declined due to having plans with his uncle Robert the following day to play badminton. Min left his parents' home at around 9 p.m. to deliver some newspapers for the following morning. Eventually, the whole family headed back to their home on Boundary Road. Early the following day, chatter amongst locals started. Min's news agency was unusually closed, and the newspapers had mounted up outside the store without being taken in. It was a busy Saturday morning, and Min not opening his agency without any warning was a cause for concern. Min's sister Kathy received a phone call from a worried customer asking what was going on. Following this, Kathy and her husband Robert headed straight over to the Lin family home, less than a 5-minute walk away. At around 9 a.m., they reached the house and found the door was unlocked. Downstairs, everything appeared as expected. Nothing was disturbed, but the house was eerily silent, and no one was responding to Kathy and Robert's calls. Heading up to the second floor, however, it was a very different story. They were met with a terrifying sight. In the master bedroom lay body. She had been bludgeoned to death, and the room was full of blood. Upon making their way through the rest of the upstairs floor, each room had an equally horrifying scene. Irene's body was found in her room, slumped against her bed. Min and Lily's 2 young sons, Henry and Terry, were also found dead in their bedroom across the corridor. Blood completely covered the walls, floors, and ceilings in each room, and the crime scene, and the murders would go down as one of the most brutal in Australian history. Min Lin, however, was nowhere to be found. Kathy dialed 000 for an ambulance.
Why do you think someone's dying? You need to tell me something. You're asking for an ambulance, but why? What's wrong? Don't scream. Is someone unconscious? I think someone may die. Why? Why? I'm not sure, but maybe someone killed my brother Henry. I need someone to come quick. Yeah, we are coming. You need to stop screaming and tell me what the problem is. Someone killed my brother Henry. Why do you think that? Yeah, because I went to his home and I knocked the door and the door just closed and I opened and I'm just there finding my brother. I couldn't find him. I'm not sure. Where's your brother? Are they on the ground? No. 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 They're in the bedroom. They're all in the bedroom. Are they in the house? Is your brother in the house? I'm not sure. Have you found? We are driving there. Answer my question, please. Have you found a body? Have you found a body? Just quick. We are driving there. Don't say quick. Tell me what's wrong. Have you seen your brother? I'm not sure. No, it's yes or no. Can you see him? No, I don't know. Is he in the house? Can you see their bodies? Yeah, I saw. Towards the end of the call, a hysterical Kathy could be heard pleading with her husband, Robert, begging him not to leave her alone in the house. She was heard saying in Cantonese, I am more scared than you are. But Robert insisted he had to go and pick up hers and her brother's parents, leaving a frantic Kathy in the house alone. Police and paramedics arrived on scene and were met with Kathy at the front door screaming for help. Men was still unaccounted for, but on Kathy's advice, the police did a further search of the master bedroom and looked under the duvet. It was here that they finally found Min's body. He too had met the same terrible end as his family. Robert, Kathy, Yang Fien, and Funing Zhu were taken to hospital to be treated for shock. A short while later, Brenda, still away on her trip, decided to log into Facebook to catch up with things back home. Tragically, she learned what had happened to her family shortly after signing in. People began messaging her asking if she was okay and sending her articles that showed pictures of her house. At first, she thought they were all playing some sort of sick joke, but her school arranged for her to travel back to Sydney on the first available flight. After landing, she was met with Kathy and police officers who confirmed the horrific news. The last time Brenda had seen her family was when her father dropped her off a few days prior to begin her school excursion. Not wanting to draw attention to anything in front of her friends, she and her father awkwardly said goodbye and parted ways. Brenda said, to this day, my biggest regret was not hugging and telling him I loved him. Strike Force No was a secret operation that was implemented to investigate the 5 murders, and pressure was on to solve a case that had become very high profile very quickly. The deaths of the Lin family started dominating the media with all outlets keen to get the next scoop or lead on the case. It was initially reported that it may have been a murder-suicide and the police said this was a possibility that was being investigated, but judging by the severe injuries sustained from the lengthy attacks and the fact that the injuries were consistent across all 5 people in the house, this theory was quickly ruled out. Investigators noted several things about the crime scene. It appeared that whoever regained access to the house knew the layout and
was very comfortable with their surroundings. There were no signs of a break-in and nothing appeared to have been ransacked or stolen. The power to the house had been cut from the outside. Police quickly determined that due to there being no signs of a forced entry, whoever the killer was most likely had a key to the property. 15-year-old Brenda's bedroom was completely untouched. And unlike the other bedrooms, which showed blood on all the door handles, her door handle was clean. This further fueled the police's theory that whoever had committed the crime knew the family and therefore knew Brenda was not there, deliberately avoiding that specific room. It was also determined that it was likely the killer had been wearing gloves due to the way the blood was smeared and spread. Officers quickly concluded that there was only one perpetrator, and although there were 24 bloody footprints found, they were all the same size and make of shoe. The prints were between a US size 8.5 and a 10. The family were also disfigured from the attacks that forensic analysis had to be used to formally identify them. It was determined that the murders had taken place between 2 and 5:30 a.m. Police believed that Min and Lily were killed first, and Irene was killed after before the killer went into the young boy's room last. Detectives concluded that the two young brothers most likely woke up after hearing their parents and aunt being killed. Experts also confirmed that due to the blood splatter analysis and the position the boys were found in on the floor, they had fought for their lives with everything they had. Henry was killed with 3 blows to the head. Terry was the only one not killed instantly and potentially stayed alive for up to 2 hours after the attack, which ultimately saw him struck 6 times. Blunt force trauma was listed as the cause of death, and with 4 out of the 5 victims, asphyxiation was also a contributing factor. A distinct pattern was visible on the family's faces, and a forensic pathologist determined that a hammer-like object with a rope around it was the murder weapon they were looking for. It was likely that the killer wrapped the rope around their wrist during the attacks. Over the following days, police brought Robert and Kathy in for interviews. "Did you regard me as a friend?" "Yes. When I first came to Australia, I didn't know anything about this country. For example, I don't know how to go from one place to another, or I don't know how to say the address. In this case, I asked him to help me and he was quite happy to help me. For example, when we bought a car, my wife cannot use her name to buy a car. So, we used Ming's name to register the car. Just to confirm, Ming's parents only have the 2 children." "Yep. Yep. Only 2 children. There's no one else that we've left out?" "No. Robert, is there anything that you can tell me about Henry and Terry? Did they go swimming, or did they play soccer, or did they have activities? Did they just have a family life with you and your parents-in-law?" Henry is quite an open-minded child. He loves to get along with other people. He likes to play tennis and badminton. He likes to play badminton with me. Robert held his head in his hands through most of the interviews, crying and staring down at the table. Through his translator, he told the police that he and his wife, Kathy, had left hers in Ming's parents' house the previous night. When they got back home, he'd watched sports before having a bath at around 2 a.m. After this, he headed to bed. He then described the following day. "I can see everywhere was red. I think I saw my sister-in-law first. Once I saw her, I held Kathy and I said, 'Kathy, don't look at it. and I saw that the bedside, which is close to the door, I saw this side. I saw a staff, a group of staff. I think it was her brother. I always think that her brother was in as well because I saw her car. I saw his van. So, we went out from the room. I went out with Kathy. We ran to the other room. I saw the terrace room. I indicated before. Used to be terrace room. The door was closed. Kathy pushed open the door. We saw Irene on the bed. I tried to touch her. I went closer. I tried to touch her. Because I wanted to know whether she was still alive, because when I saw her, she was not just lying down on the bed flat. So, I want to try, but Kathy hold me back. So, I think I did not actually touch her. We reached the last bedroom. The door was half closed. We entered the room. We can see both children were lying on the floor. Kathy held me back. She kept yelling, "Let's go. Let's go." She was so frightening. I was afraid as well how you and your family have been able to cope with something that no family in this country can possibly imagine you've had to go through. How difficult that has been at this moment. I don't know how to say, but I feel everyone support us and care us and love us. I want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. How important has that been, Kathy, for you to know that everybody cares so much for what you're going through? All the people love us, care us, and support us. We feel we need to be strong to do the best as soon as possible. Is there any appeal you can say now? Ask them for anybody who can help. I'd like to say that they need more information, even very small crew to help them to solve the case. If anyone can help, please contact the police. 3 weeks after the family were killed, business at the Epping Central News Agency resumed. Kathy and Robert took over the ownership of the store and became Brenda's legal guardians. Robert offered to adopt Brenda a matter of hours after her parents were found. The funeral for the Lynn family was held in August. Hundreds of mourners turned up to pay their respects, including the children's school and the police looking after the investigation. The outpouring of grief was immense. A trust fund was set up to help Brenda with her future education, and the public came out in force to show their support for the family, as well as family and friends of the Lynns. The community wanted answers and justice. 2. Strike Force No and the investigating team began to draw some conclusions. The lack of a break-in indicated the killer had a key, and the fact this person knew the layout of the house, including how to cut the power from the outside. The killer's knowledge that Brenda was not home, hence the reason her room was left undisturbed. And the shoe prints that covered the house pointed to just one person, Robert. The 000 arrow call Kathy had made to authorities that morning also added more weight to this case. During the call, Kathy could be heard talking in Cantonese, begging Robert not to leave her alone in the house. For all anybody knew, the killer may still have been lying in wait somewhere or may have potentially come back at any time. Despite her pleas, Robert left her for an hour to pick up her parents. Police concluded that only he would have known for definite that his wife was no longer in danger of meeting the same end as her family, hence the reason he left her. It was also alleged that when Kathy and Robert first went to the Lynn family home at 9 a.m. that morning, Robert told Kathy, "Don't look." Before they could even see anything, indicating he already knew the scene that lay ahead. But police needed more before they could make an arrest. As Brenda was now living with Kathy and Robert, police set up pinhole surveillance cameras inside the couple's home. They had conducted a risk assessment to determine whether or not Robert posed any threat towards Brenda. And ultimately they determined he did not. Robert would have known Brenda's schedule and therefore could have easily waited for her to come home before carrying out the murders, but he didn't. Further analysis of the Lynn's house found that the bloody shoe prints at the scene were from a make of A6 trainer, the same trainers that Robert could be seen wearing in old photographs. Observing more from within Robert and Kathy's home, police made another big link to the shoes in question. Robert was seen on one of the cameras talking to Kathy at the dining table. Whilst talking, he could be seen cutting a box into small pieces. He then soaked the pieces in a bucket before flushing them down the toilet. The box was an A6 trainer shoe box and the shoes in question were found out to be a men's US 9.5. Robert also made a curious phone call to a detective. He phoned to clarify something he may have said back when the Lynn family were discovered. He said he may have told a police officer at the scene that there were 5 bodies inside the house, but he claimed what he meant to say was that there were 4 or 5 bodies and that he was phoning to clear the statement up. This only added more to the police's case. Although Min was the last to be found inside the house, police believed it was obvious that Robert knew exactly where he was and had slipped up when he said 5 bodies during a time when the 5th victim couldn't be accounted for. It wasn't long before police began a thorough search of Robert and Kathy's home and seized Robert's car. The couple had both confirmed in previous interviews that on the morning the family were discovered, they had both been up early. Robert told the police he had spent the morning in his garage. Knowing this, police were keen to search that particular space. During the search of the garage, a stain was found on the floor and this was labeled up as stain number 91. Experts believe this was a transfer stain and it contained a mixture of DNA. It was quickly sent away for testing. After the results came back, it was concluded that stain 91 contained DNA from 4 out of the 5 victims. It matched 9-year-old Terry, with a 1 in 50 quadrillion chance of the DNA belonging to anyone else. Following this huge discovery, at 9 a.m. on May 5, 2011, Robert Z. was arrested for the murder of his extended family. He applied for bail, but this was denied. Although Kathy had confirmed Robert's alibi for that night, saying he didn't leave their bed, it is believed that Robert sedated her before leaving early that morning sometime after 2 a.m. He then headed over to the Lynn's house with a key that had been cut. It was also concluded that Robert killed each member of the family in the order in which they presented a threat for resistance or detention. It is thought that the 2 boys and Irene were collateral damage or secondary victims who may have woken up when Min and Lily were being killed. Police phoned Brenda's school and she was quickly pulled into the principal's office and told the news about her uncle's arrest. Brenda's principal, Susan, said she herself had become suspicious of Robert when she witnessed him reducing Brenda to tears in the schoolyard. She said he was so physically close to her, speaking loudly, rapidly in Chinese. Brenda with her head down, tears falling down. It was clear that he was trying to get her to agree to something. I told my husband, I think I've just spent all day with a murderer. I just got a gut feeling he was dangerous. And I was very worried for Brenda's safety. Susan was so concerned that she eventually persuaded Brenda to obtain a lawyer. Brenda's lawyer soon began to suspect Robert as well. At this time, Brenda did not think it was possible that her uncle could have ever been involved. For a lot of people, the motive remained unclear. It was initially thought that Robert's motive stemmed from nothing more than jealousy and greed. Since coming to Sydney, he had been virtually unemployed after a restaurant venture he had failed. Police also found no evidence to suggest that he was actually an ear, nose, and throat specialist back in China. His brother-in-law, Min, was a successful businessman by this point, and police believe that Robert's jealousy of Min consumed him. Robert believed he was entitled to respect and admiration from his extended family, but felt he was denied it because of the attention given to Min. 3.5 years on from the Lynn murders, the brother-in-law of one of the victims has been ordered to stand trial. In December 2012, Robert was committed to stand trial. Some of the DNA evidence was still in the process of being tested and the trial was delayed and pushed back. But in May 2014, the trial of Robert Z began. He pleaded not guilty. Since July 2011, Robert had been sharing details with a fellow inmate, who subsequently reported this back to police. The informant took the stand to testify against Robert in exchange for a reduced sentence. The inmate, known as Witness A, said that Robert had told him he had bought a hammer, which was the murder weapon, from a $2 shop, as he knew the CCTV cameras in the shop were fake. He also alleged that Robert had said he'd planned to steal a dead man's DNA from a funeral home and plant it on the murder weapon. Witness A said Robert told him that on the night of the murder, he had sedated Kathy before leaving the house. Despite Witness A pushing Robert to find out where the murder weapon was, to this day, it has never been located. It is thought that on the morning Robert drove to pick up Yongfin and thanking Zhu, he took the murder weapon with him and disposed of it along the way. Robert's defense team stated that it would have been impossible for one person to commit all 5 murders and escape unharmed. They also argued that Robert was not the only person living in Australia that wore size 9.586 trainers. They stated that there was potentially 3 different sets of shoe prints at the crime scene, not just one. During the trial, Brenda, who was faced with all of the evidence against her uncle, said she finally had to accept the reality of what he had done to her family. Brenda's identity was kept hidden during the trials. She spoke to her lawyer and gave him evidence that added even more to an already shocking story. She told her lawyer and later the New South Wales Supreme Court that Robert had sexually assaulted her on a number of occasions before the murders. After she moved in with him and Kathy, the assaults began to escalate. The Lynn family estate, which likely would have gone to Brenda, was now being controlled by Robert and Kathy. And Robert evicted Min and Kathy's parents from the home that Min had bought for them. This added more weight to the theory that he was so fixated with Brenda, he did everything in his power to make sure she would be left with no choice but to move in with him and Kathy. While observing the family through pinhole cameras, police did observe Robert touching Brenda in what they called an uncomfortable way. But police said the touching they observed didn't amount to molestation. Brenda's grandfather, Yang Fien, told the court that he had seen Robert staring into Brenda's bedroom during the early hours one morning. The jury's in. All of the trials knew Brenda's evidence, but journalists could not publish anything that identified her. She was referred to as Miss AB. After Brenda told the courtroom about the abuse she had suffered, she said that her Aunt Kathy began sending Brenda messages proclaiming that Robert had been framed by the police and that everyone had it all wrong. Brenda spoke of how disappointed she was in Kathy's reaction. After the accounts of sexual abuse were brought to light in the courtroom, Justice Johnson declared a mistrial. A new trial had to be set for August 2014. As the Crown opened its case today for the second time, the jury heard a chilling version of what took place on the night of their deaths. The Crown alleges Robert Z. was consumed with intense hatred and bitterness when he killed 5 members of his own family. The court was told yesterday there would be an allegation of sexual abuse of a young female by a close male relative. The Crown is yet to expand on that and a conversation Z allegedly had with a fellow inmate at Long Bay Jail. On the first day of the second trial, the prosecution presented a new theory behind Robert's motive. As well as his jealousy of Min, he evidently had a disturbing sexual obsession with Min's daughter, Brenda. But unfortunately, not long into the second trial, Justice Peter Johnson fell ill and the trial again was postponed. 6 months later, in February 2015, Robert's third trial began. Justice Elizabeth Fullerton was now presiding and the trial went on to last for 10 months. The jury took 19 days to deliberate. However, they could not reach a unanimous verdict and it was again declared a mistrial. Justice Fullerton granted Robert bail while he awaited his next trial. After almost 5 years behind bars without a conviction, he was fitted with an electronic monitor and allowed back home. The wife of Robert Z., the man accused of killing 5 members of the Lynn family, has just spoken of her joy at him being released on bail in time for Christmas. The 51-year-old has spent nearly 5 years behind bars after he was charged with the 2009 murders. In June 2016, the fourth and what would be the final trial began with Justice Fullerton still presiding. And 8 months later, in February 2017, the jury had reached their verdict. 5 members of the same family were beaten to death as they lay in their beds in Sydney's suburban north. The victims included boys aged 9 and 12. Today, a jury has convicted the children's uncle. The prosecution arguing that Robert Z. was motivated by greed and resentment. Robert was found guilty by a majority verdict of 11-1. Kathy and Min's parents said they were happy with the verdict they had waited so long for. The commission of a series of intentional and brutal killings of 5 members of a family, including 2 children, in their family home in the early hours of the morning whilst they were sleeping or being roused from sleep in a single episode of brutal and calculated murderous violence is a course of offending that can only be described as heinous in the extreme. Would you stand up please? Lynn bin Robert Z. On counts 1 to 5 on the indictment, you are convicted of the murders of Min Norman Lynn, Yuni Lai Lynn, Yinbin Irene Lynn, Henry Lynn, and Terry Lynn. On each count, you are sentenced to imprisonment for life. Just as Fullerton said of Brenda, I acknowledge the profound grief she has suffered and continues to suffer. While the law does not permit a sentencing judge to take into account any additional penalty because a family member of a murder victim has suffered through their death. In this case, the far-reaching and immeasurable harm done is also an aspect of the harm done to the community. And for that reason, I also take that into account when imposing life sentences in this case. Robert was given 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. It would be years before the suppression order that concealed Brenda's identity was lifted when she agreed to appear in an exclusive interview with Channel 7. Robert's wife, Kathy, still believes he is innocent and said that he is a caring man who would never hurt the family. Kathy and Min's parents, however, agree with the rulings and believe that Robert is now where he belongs, saying he is not a human being, he is a monster. Robert appealed his sentences in June 2020. But in 2021, after just 10 minutes, at the New South Wales Criminal Appeals Court, 3 judges dismissed his appeal. In her interviews, Brenda Lynn said she is still trying to rebuild her life as best she can. She credits her amazing family with making her the person she is today, and she said she is forever grateful for how the community came together to help her. She wants to make sure she carries on doing all the things she knows her family would have wanted her to do, and said she hopes in the future she is able to do something to help other people and give back to everyone that supported her. Story 3. The people that were there that night in the red 4-wheel drive have gone there obviously to pick her up, which it didn't take them too long to get there, so they can't live too far from Manam itself. But hopefully they're just helping her. Pretty much in a sense, hiding her away so she can sort herself out. The sisters are worried. She's come to some harm, but are refusing to give up hope. Jody, please come home. We miss you. Jody Myers. Family described her as someone that loved life and lived it to the fullest. Always positive and smiling, 20-year-old. Jod was a doing mother to her baby boy, Elijah. Those that knew her said becoming a mom was the best thing that ever happened to her, and her son was her whole world. 2-year-old Elijah's father was 29-year-old Neil Archer. He and Jod were engaged and lived together in Manam, South Australia. Just down the road from them lived Neil's mother, Margaret, and her husband, Lawrence. Jod and Neil were invited to Jod's stepfather's birthday party. Jod spent time with her family enjoying the barbecue and campfire, but Neil never emerged from the car and refused to engage in the celebrations or accept any of the food. He just sat in the car and waited for Jod. At around 7:30, 8 o'clock, Jod joined Neil and they both drove home together. 2 days later, Lucy, Jod's mother, got a text message from Jod's phone. The message said that she had left Neil and gone to stay with some friends while she sorted everything out, but she hadn't taken Elijah with her, and Lucy knew Jod would never have left her baby boy behind. Lucy replied to the message, but got no response back. She showed the message to her eldest daughter and her reaction was the same as Lucy's. This wasn't Jod texting. They went straight to the police with their concerns. Detectives in the team at the Major Crime Squad agreed and felt it was highly unlikely that Jod would have just upped and left, especially without her son. As word spread about Jod's strange disappearance, her fiancé Neil and his mother Margaret started making pleas for her to come home. If she does have any information, if they can, I beg them please to come forward. I'm very worried because she hasn't contacted anyone as far as I know of. Me and her son really do want her to contact somebody or come home. If she is listening, I just want her to know that we all do love her and miss her dearly. Neil and his mother, Margaret, told the police that they had seen Jod leave in a red car with a mystery couple. They said they didn't know the couple, but they hoped that they were looking after Jod while she took some space and time for herself. The people that were there that night in the red four-wheel drive have gone there obviously to pick her up. Which it didn't take them too long to get there, so they can't live too far from Manam itself. But hopefully, they're just helping her. Pretty much in a sense, hiding her away so she can sort herself out. News outlets circulated images of the car, hoping for it to jog someone's memory. You may remember Neil Archer's claim that he last saw Jody Myers leaving their home in a red Nissan X-Trail. Well, today police released an image of a similar looking vehicle, which 9 News understands has been provided to them by Mr. Archer himself. It's believed he claims it's a very close likeness to the car that he saw, minus the black strip that can be seen there on the side. So, police are calling for anyone who might have information about that red Nissan X-Trail, to contact them. Major crime. Detectives have joined the investigation into the disappearance of young mother Jody Myers, who vanished from her Manam home 13 days ago. Late today, they interviewed her partner, who's told 9 News he hasn't seen her since the couple fought and she left with 2 strangers. 4 o'clock this afternoon, Neil Archer returns to Manam police station to give a second statement about the disappearance of his girlfriend. This time, he was met by major crime detectives who were deployed from Adelaide this morning to retrace Jody Myers' last known movements. Several weeks would pass with still no sighting of or word from Jod. Searches were being conducted throughout the town and alongside the bank of the river Murray, but no clues turned up anywhere. A small glimmer of hope came when they looked into Jod's bank records and found that $250 had been withdrawn from her account at a nearby ATM machine. This $250 was the last of her savings. And just hours later, her phone suddenly had credit in it before the message was sent to her mom, Lucy. Police said about obtaining any and all the footage they could from that street to see if they could spot Jod. While the police were working on this, Neil and Margaret were fast becoming a regular feature on the local news, and reporters were firing some tough questions at Neil. So, you're not a murderer? You're not a killer? No, I'm not. I've never harmed anyone in that way. So, I would never harm anyone in that way. It's getting really bad. We miss her. We want her to come home or at least contact someone. Someone that's out there knows anything to contact the police or Crime Stoppers. Her son needs her. He needs his mom. Sorry. She was like a daughter to me. We spoke about anything and everything. The more the pair spoke to the media and inserted themselves into the investigation, the more people started to question them. Jod's family had concerns about Neil from the get-go. They said he didn't fit in with the rest of the family and made no effort to do so. He never came across as someone that was a reliable and stable presence in Jod's life. Jod's brother-in-law, Michael, said that he was always a little off-center from everything. Jod's mother was also hesitant about the relationship from the beginning. She said she felt Jod made out to family and friends that she was happier than she actually was. At one point, Jod had said she could finally start to see what Neil was trying to do, which was take her away from her family. Neil's behavior became more controlling and manipulative. He always had to have access to her Facebook account and stopped her from going to see people without him. Neil had to know where Jody was and who she was with all the time. Another source of tension was Margaret Archer. Margaret was the mother of 4 boys. She raised her sons in Adelaide before moving to a housing estate in the small town of Manaham, South Australia. Neil lived with her until his mid-20s. That was until he met Jody. Margaret adored Neil and her grandson Elijah, but she showed very little care for Jod. It's said that Margaret would often take Elijah inside and lock Jod out of the house, keeping him from her. The relationship between Neil and Jod became more and more toxic, and by early 2015, Jod confided in her family that she wanted to leave him. Neil caught wind of this and blamed Jod's family for getting involved in the relationship. Jod's brother-in-law, Michael, told Neil if Jod wanted to leave, he had 2 choices. Fight for her and try and work through it, or just walk away and let her live her life. Neil turned to him emotionless and said, "I will kill her." By mid-September, Neil Archer was officially named as a person of interest. Police now had reason to believe that Jod had been met with foul play and was likely deceased. The family of missing man and woman Jody Myers say they've been left devastated by the revelation. Police believe the young mother has been murdered, but they say they're determined to cling to hope until her fate is known for certain. A family's most heart-wrenching fears confirmed. Devastating. It's not something you want to hear. It's pretty emotional. Detectives revealing they believe missing man and mother Jody Myers has been murdered yesterday, declaring her disappearance a major crime. It's very hard to hear, especially from police. Although we've got our suspicions, but to hear it from police is very devastating and upsetting. Quite shocking. I didn't think they'd do that so soon. Hopefully they'd keep looking for her as a lie. Once the CCTV near the ATM machine had been processed, police could finally see exactly who it was withdrawing the money. Margaret Archer was seen withdrawing the $250. She was wearing a gray hoodie and dark trousers while Neil wearing a baseball cap. Footage then picked up Neil and Margaret in Neil's green Ford driving and then parking outside a news agency. Margaret entered the news agency and bought a $10 credit voucher for a phone. After she left the shop, she headed back to the car where she and Neil waited for 6 minutes. During this time, the text that raised the red flag was sent from Jod's phone to her mother. After the message was sent, the pair drove back. Just the day after Jod was last seen, CCTV footage showed Margaret at Bunnings warehouse buying over 600 kilograms of cement, paid for with the cash she had taken from Jod's bank account. Lawrence, Margaret's husband, had been away in Tasmania when Jod disappeared. And when he returned, he was surprised to see that the shed floor had been newly concreted. Neil said they had done it as a Father's Day gift for him. Lawrence knew this was out of character and said that Neil just wasn't the kind of guy to do something like that for somebody else. Lawrence innocently revealed all of this to the police. Major crime detectives have made an arrest over the disappearance of man and mother Jody Myers, who they fear has met with foul play. But the suspect has been charged with theft, not murder. These are exclusive pictures of inside the Murray Bridge police station where Margaret Archer was arrested this afternoon. She emerged just before 3 o'clock with 2 detectives and her partner Lori. "What have you been charged with, Margaret?"
Nothing. Innocent. No comment. Have they accused you of using Jod's ATM card? Did you use the ATM card? No, I didn't. Police think she did. They've charged the 55-year-old with using Jody Meyer's ATM card one day after the 20-year-old vanished. Mrs. Archer is the mother of Jod's boyfriend, Neil Archer, who has been named as the only person of interest in her suspected murder. You seem very upset. Yeah, well, I don't like being charged for something I haven't done. With all of this evidence mounting up and the police slowly closing in, it wasn't long before Neil cracked under pressure. One day with Margaret out the house, Neil decided it was time to confide in his brother, Aaron. In the laundry room of the house, Neil bluntly said, "I killed her," and then quickly went to leave. But his brother stopped him in his tracks and demanded to know why he had done it. Neil said he knew Jod was about to leave him and take Elijah too. Again, after admitting this, he hastily tried to walk away, but Aaron still had no intention of letting him leave. How? Oh, he asked him. Neil told him he had strangled Jod in their home before taking her body to his mother's house and burying her under the tool shed. Aaron said Aaron insisted Neil turn himself in, but when he didn't, Aaron decided to do it for him. Before long, police were at Margaret Archer's property and Neil Archer was charged with murder. Good evening. A tragic end to the search for missing man and woman Jody Myers, whose body has been found buried under a backyard shed. Her partner has been charged with her murder. The grim find made at his parents' home. Jody Myers' body was discovered in a shallow grave under the concrete slab Neil had laid. This was just meters from where the pair had been courting the media and begging for Jod's safe return. It was later confirmed that Jod had been strangled with the cord from one of Neil's hoodies. Margaret Archer was later charged with helping Neil cover up the crime. Guilty plea for murder has sparked emotional scenes in an Adelaide courtroom as Neil Archer admitted to killing his former partner Jody Myers. The victim's family labeling the 31-year-old gutless and calling for a life sentence to be imposed. Neil Archer eventually pleaded guilty to the murder of 20-year-old Jody Myers, sparing her family the agony of sitting through a painful trial. Under state law, he faced a non-parole period of at least 20 years, but he believed he deserved a special parole term because he had pleaded guilty in the first place. This came after a separate murder case upheld a non-parole period of 15 years for special reasons. Neil was hoping for the same ruling, and the court heard he was actually eligible for a 30% discount. Despite this, he was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 20 years for the murder of Jody Myers. Justice Trish Kelly said applying the full discount would have been disproportionate to the seriousness of the offense and would be so inappropriate that it would shock the public conscience. The following year, Margaret Archer also pleaded guilty in the district court to one count of assisting an offender. She was sentenced to 6.5 years with a minimum non-parole period of 4 years. However, her sentence was backdated to when she was taken into custody back in December 2015, which means she was eligible for parole in 2019. Despite the police and Jod's family's beliefs, Margaret still maintains she had nothing to do with the murder itself. Jod's son, Elijah, now lives with his grandmother, Lucy. Elijah
Keeps a photo of Jod with him all the time, so he can carry on sharing things with her. Lucy said that one Christmas, Elijah got a bicycle. He took the photo of his mother out to show her his gift and then sat the photo on the table so she could watch him ride his new bike. Story 4. I picked up my gun and I dumped it, and instead of aiming for the rabbit, I swung around and I shot him. Too late. I looked over to him and he was muttering. I shot him again and then once more. June 17, 1924. Archibald Thompson Hall was born in Ibro Road in Glasgow, Scotland. His childhood was fragmented and he was socially excluded in his youth. As he struggled to make and maintain friendships, he would frequently not attend school and would spend his free time watching variety shows. Struck by the praise and adulation the performers would receive, he was driven by a desire to elevate himself out of his working-class background and disjointed home life. While he was still in his teens, he began having run-ins with the law and, according to reports, was on the police's radar from the age of just 15 years old. Hall was also bisexual and his marriage had fallen apart soon after it had started. In the late 1940s, Hall left Scotland and travelled south to England. London was still under rationing, as was the rest of the country, and the rebuilding of the city wouldn't fully get underway until the 1950s. Hall travelled to Soho and soon became a firm fixture in the nightclubs. During that time, not only was homosexuality illegal, but members of the LGBTQ community were treated appallingly by both police and society in general. The London club scene, however, was more open. During that time, various gangs controlled different parts of the city, and this gave Hall an insight into London's criminal underworld, a life he was desperate to be a part of. His love of performing made him a consummate con man, and he soon began committing theft. Between 1945 and 1977, Hall had spent more time inside prison than out of it. Alongside his love of variety shows, cinema was another fixation for Hall. Upon his release from prison, he began using the name Roy Fontaine, named after legendary actress Joan Fontaine, after he saw her in Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. He would confidently pose as an aristocrat or a wealthy American and quickly perfected his skills as a con man and thief. He would introduce himself as Dr. Roy Fontaine to gain people's trust. And, according to one report, he was jailed in the 1970s for selling secret papers to the Russians. In a letter, Hall explained that this was a miscarriage of justice and that he was an innocent man. On one occasion, he stole the invitation meant for his employer and impersonated him at a party at Holy House in Edinburgh. As he began to move up the social circles, he got a job as a butler in Dumfries, Scotland, working for Lady Margaret Hudson. Lady Hudson was the widow of Sir Austin Hudson, a former Conservative Member of Parliament. Hall made a good impression with those in the community, and he was described as polite and incredibly well-mannered. In 1977, one of Hall's former lovers arrived in Dumfries, throwing Hall's life into chaos. David Wright had shared a cell with Archibald Hall when they were both serving time in Hall prison together. The pair had had a sexual relationship, and Wright's presence in Dumfries was a major threat to Hall. David Wright was given a job as a gamekeeper and began doing odd jobs throughout the house. He knew too much about Hall in his past and threatened to reveal this to Lady Hudson. Wright also began to steal from the house, leaving Hall enraged. Wright stole some of the antique silver in a ring, but Archibald Hall told him he needed to return it, and this quickly sparked an explosive row. As the arguments escalated, David attempted to shoot Archibald, but missed. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Hall plied Wright with alcohol before the pair slept together. Although the argument appeared to be over, Hall had made his mind up. David Wright had to die. The next morning, they decided to go rabbit hunting on the grounds. Before they left, Hall ensured that Wright's gun was not loaded. David Wright remarked, "What a lovely day it was." Hall, ever the performer, allegedly replied, "Yeah, a lovely day. Shame. This is the last day you will see." He then pulled his gun up and shot David Wright in the head. Archibald Hall had gone from a thief and con man to a cold-blooded killer. He buried Wright next to the river that ran through the grounds. When he would take Lady Hudson's dog for a walk, each time he would put more stones on where he had buried the body so that the dog couldn't smell it. Hall told Lady Hudson that Wright had left suddenly due to being offered a job elsewhere. Soon after, Hall headed back to London. Lady Hudson was none the wiser about the sinister going on and gave him a glowing reference to help him secure his next job. In October 1977, he got a job as a butler for Walter and Dorothy Scott Elliott. Walter Scott Elliott was 82 years old and had served as the Labour MP for Accrington between 1945 and 1950. He was from an aristocratic Scottish background, and his wife Dorothy was also incredibly wealthy. The pair lived at 200 Sloane Street in the prominent and affluent area of Knightsbridge, West London. Like Lady Hudson, the Scott Elliots found him to be affable, polite, and developed a real fondness for him. Being part of their household gave Archibald Hall the opportunity to case nearby properties and seamlessly move about in their social circles. He intended to rob his elderly wealthy employers, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. He made contact with his former lover, an Irish woman named Mary Cogle, and asked if she knew anyone that could help him pull it off. She arranged a meeting, and in November 1977 at a pub in King's Cross, she introduced 53-year-old Archibald Hall to 39-year-old Michael Kiddo. Like Archibald Hall, Michael Kiddo had had an unstable childhood, and he also spent time in the foster care system. After moving around a lot, he ended up in the armed forces, but he was dishonorably discharged after committing a robbery. Kiddo had had 2 failed marriages and a daughter, and with no stable address, he moved around the country often. He would take on odd jobs where he could find them in an attempt to support himself. He had many run-ins with the law and was frequently in front of judges for committing petty offenses. Despite his long rap sheet, this wasn't the experienced accomplice that Archibald Hall had been looking for. But for Kiddo, this was the perfect opportunity to make some big money. Money that was unprecedented for him. When they met, Kiddo was on the run after robbing the pub he had worked at as a barman. The crimes that Hall was talking about were a huge step up from the petty offenses that Kiddo had committed thus far. The dynamic between the pair was instant. Hall was in charge, and Kiddo did what he was told to do. Kiddo greatly admired Hall and was hugely flattered that he had been asked to help him in his criminal endeavors. After committing several robberies in the local area, they set about devising a plan to rob Walter and Dorothy Scott Elliott. They would steal little and often in the hopes that the vulnerable elderly couple wouldn't realize. This plan, however, quickly and rather spectacularly fell apart. In December 1977, less than a month after they had first met, Dorothy Scott Elliott walked in on Hall and Kiddo discussing their plans and what could be stolen from the home. Kiddo had no right to be in the house, and it appeared that their crimes were about to come to an abrupt end. In reality, they were about to escalate in the most appalling way imaginable. They both immediately decided that she had to be killed. Dorothy Scott Elliott was smothered to death while her beloved husband Walter was asleep upstairs. In murdering Dorothy, they had killed a popular socialite in the busy UK capital. Someone whose disappearance would not go unnoticed. They knew they had to leave and leave quickly. They moved her body to the boot of their car before drugging Walter and driving to Scotland. In order not to draw attention to themselves, Mary Kogel dressed up as the deceased Dorothy Scott Elliott. According to the Daily Record, they convinced the confused and semi-conscious Walter to allow them to drive him to various banks, withdrawing huge sums of money. After traveling 400 m, they reached Brecco in Perth. After they pulled into a quiet road, they removed the body of Dorothy Scott Elliott and buried her. Walter was still under the influence of the drugs they had given him. And after burying Dorothy, they carried on driving. They took him to an isolated spot in Innes. He was taken out of the car and strangled with a scarf. Believing he was dead, Hall and Kiddo walked back to the car, but they began to hear a groaning sound coming from where they had left Walter's body. He was still alive. According to Hall, he sent Kiddo back with a shovel and told him to finish the job. Walter Scott Elliott was then beaten to death. 3 people were now dead, and the crime spree showed no signs of stopping. But the trio soon ran into problems. Mary Kogel insisted on continuing to wear Dorothy's distinctive fur coat as well as her jewelry, which started to bring them unwanted attention. Desperate to escape, they headed to Cumbria and arrived in the small village of Newton Arash. They began to rent a cottage nearby, and Kiddo and Hall became regulars at the local pub while they attempted to lie low. Unbeknownst to the residents of this sleepy English village, 2 brutal murderers and their accomplice were now living in their midst. Hall told local residents that he was an antique dealer, another part of the web of lies he was spinning. During their time at the cottage, they had made several trips back to where the Scott Elliots had lived to sell off more of their antiques. They told the Scott Elliots caretaker that the couple had gone abroad unexpectedly. A few weeks later, on Christmas Day 1977, a shepherd was walking down by the stream that ran past the village. It was here that he made a horrific discovery. He found the body of a woman lying in the water. She had suffered appalling head injuries and had seemingly died a very violent death. It soon became clear who it was. It was Mary Kogel. As the investigation into her murder got underway a few weeks later in January 1978, Hall contacted the mother of an old associate and asked if he and Kiddo could stay for the night. They headed off to East Lothian, but due to a snowstorm, they had to stop mid-journey. On the night of January 16, they arrived in North Berwick and booked a room at the Blenheim House Hotel. Norman Wright, who was the owner of the hotel at the time, said there was something about the pair he immediately didn't like. Listening to his instincts, he called the police as he thought they had fled from another hotel and not paid the bill, and he was worried they might do the same to him. The police arrived and checked the tax disc on the car. The tax disc didn't match the number plate. When the police said they wanted to speak to Kiddo and Hall, Norman Wright said they were extremely calm and willing to talk to the officers. It was reported in the Watford Observer that Hall had had the number plate changed as the original one had 999 on it. The UK emergency code, which Hall didn't appreciate. The detectives then took them down to the station to answer questions. Officers described them as calm and collected, with Kiddo being quiet and Hall doing all the talking. Hall was also confident in answering the officers' questions. During their interviews, he made regular trips to the bathroom, and on one of those trips, he escaped out the window and fled the station. Officers came to remove the car, and upon seizing it, the duty inspector made a terrifying discovery. In the boot of the car was the body of a naked man. This had gone from a petty driving offense to a major murder investigation. But one of their killers had just escaped. Archibald's flashy style ultimately caught up with him. He was immediately recognizable as he was smartly dressed with a red and white polka dot handkerchief in his breast pocket. And later that night he was caught as part of a road check-in nearby Waleford. Finally, Archibald Hall was back in custody. When he was back at the station, he allegedly swallowed pills that he had concealed and subsequently collapsed. He was taken to hospital and later discharged back into the custody of officers. He was initially arrested for handling stolen items, giving police more time to build a case against him for murder. Following the discovery in North Berwick on January 16, 1978, in a motor car containing a deceased body, a person named Archibald Thompson Hall, 53 years of age with no fixed abode, appeared before Sheriff Kenneth Middleton and the Sheriff Court, Harrington, on a petition containing a charge of theft of property in England. He is in custody and will appear again in a week's time. It wasn't long before he started talking, and officers could not believe what they were hearing. In the case of Dorothy Scott Elliott, both men began to blame each other. But what had happened to the woman who had brought Hall and Kiddo together? What had happened to Mary Kogel? In his statement, Hall had said that an argument had broken out about her refusal to part with Dorothy's fur coat and jewelry. Kogel was drawing unwanted attention to them while Hall was desperate for them to fly under the radar. He explained that during an argument near the river, she had fallen off the bridge, cracked her head open, and died. But scientific analysis said otherwise. Officers believed that what had actually happened was far more deliberate. They believed that the argument had began at the cottage they were staying in, and that Mary Kogel had been beaten with a fire poker and then suffocated with a plastic bag. At the cottage, police also found blood stains and fingerprints that matched Mary Kogel. They also found linen that had the crest of the Scott Elliots on it. The men then drove her body to the river and threw it over the bridge. Then came another question. Who was the man in the boot of their car? And why had he been murdered? The final victim was not a stranger to them. He was Archibald's half-brother, Donald. It is believed that after Mary had been murdered and before they fled to Scotland, they arrived back at their cottage and found Donald waiting for them. Donald was a pedophile who had just been released from prison. Despite being related, the pair had an extremely fraught relationship and there was no love lost between the two of them. They told Donald that he could be part of their next job, which would include tying up their victims. Donald was persuaded to let them practice on him. Once he was restrained and unable to move, Hall used chloroform to render him immobile. Archibald Hall then drowned Donald in the bathtub. On January 16, 1978, the pair put Donald's body in the boot of their car and headed north towards Scotland. But why had he murdered his brother? According to Archibald's lawyer, the one person he cared about was his daughter Caroline. As his brother was a pedophile, his lawyer said, he likely had killed him to protect her, although this has been called into question. He didn't regularly see his daughter, and she was barely mentioned in his later written autobiography. In his confession, he remarked how surprised he had been with Walter Scott Elliott's strength. I was amazed at the strength that was within him. I was sure. It was as if he was draining all the strength from all the Scotch ancestors that had gone before. During their interviews, it also became clear that Kiddo had ironically had a very lucky escape in being arrested. Hall had no loyalty to him and saw him as dispensable. Kiddo was likely going to be the next victim, as Archibald had planned to murder him too. When talking about why he had committed his appalling crimes, Hall's defense was staggering. He blamed Michael Kiddo for starting him off again on a career of crime and said it was all his fault. He also made a second attempt to take his own life. While in hospital, he finally confessed to officers about his very first murder. He went on to explain how he had brutally killed David Wright. Archibald Hall eventually confessed to the murders and led the police to the bodies of his victims. As the murders had taken place in both Scotland and England, trials had to be held in both countries. The case for the murders committed in Scotland went to the High Court in Edinburgh on Kiddo's 40th birthday. The confident and performative Hall was unusually silent. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Uncharacteristically, Kiddo turned to the press bench and said, "Oh well, life begins at 40. Kiddo was convicted of the murders of Mary Cogle and Walter Scott Elliott and the manslaughter of Dorothy Scott Elliott and Donald Hall. Hall was convicted at courts in both London and Edinburgh of 4 murders. The murder of Dorothy Scott Elliott was ordered to lie on file, meaning that a judge acknowledged there was enough evidence to make a case, but it wasn't in the public interest to proceed, normally because the accused has acknowledged more serious offenses. In the summer of 1978, Hall was given 2 life sentences for the murder of Wright and Walter Scott Elliott at the High Court in Edinburgh. He was later given 2 more life sentences for the murders of Kegla and Donald Hall at the Old Bailey. In 1999, Hall wrote an autobiography called A Perfect Gentleman, detailing his life and crimes. He stated in the book he went on to cooperate in writing several other books too, including To Kill and Kill Again, The Chilling True Confessions of a Serial Killer, and The Wicked Mr. Hall. A film about his life was also due to be released with acclaimed actor Malcolm McDowell starring as the titular monster butler, but the film was cancelled due to lack of funding. While in prison, Hall went on hunger strike several times and spoke of not wanting to grow old in his cell. On September 16, 2002, while serving his sentence, Archibald Hall died at HMP Kingston. A spokesman for the coroner's office said that Hall had died of natural causes. He was 78 years old. At the time of his death, he was the oldest prisoner serving a whole life sentence. Kiddo was eventually released and his whereabouts are unknown to the public. The crimes of Archibald Hall were shocking, calculated, and cruel. 5 people lost their lives due to greed and ruthlessness, and many more fell victim to the consummate con man's lies. The chance checking of the tax disc had brought to an end an extraordinary chain of events that had left a trail of chaos and destruction. If they hadn't have been stopped, one can only speculate about how many more may have fallen victim. Story 5, Diane Burns. Now there are no suspects, no new leads, and no clues to where Tonda and Diamond Bradley might be. 4 difficult years later, Tracy Bradley's prayers have yet to be answered. 15 years ago, 2 girls, young girls, Diamond and Tonda Bradley, disappeared from their South Side home. It has been 17 years since the Bradley sisters went missing. It's hard to believe that it's been 18 years since Diamond and Tonda Bradley were missing, who went missing some 19 years ago. The family of Tonda and Diamond Bradley is holding a gathering at 5:30 tonight at Taylor Park. In 2001, 10-year-old Tonda Bradley and her 3-year-old sister Diamond vanished from their home, seemingly without a trace. Their disappearance sparked one of the biggest manhunts in Chicago history. Today, we're going to focus on their story. T. and Diamond Bradley were born to Tracy Bradley and lived in an apartment in Bronzeville, Chicago, Illinois. Diamond's father was said to be a man named George Washington. Washington was involved in a dispute with Tracy over his possible paternity. Despite this, he and Tracy were on and off for a long time. Tanda's father remains unconfirmed and unclear. Tracy Bradley was the single mother of 4 girls, and Tracy's family always helped out, babysitting and supporting her as she raised her daughters. As well as her family, there was a neighbor and good friend of Tracy who lived in the same building, and he supported her, too. His name was also George. George Sr. 10-year-old Tanda was described by one of her sisters as very outspoken and honest around her family. Someone that had a strong sense of right and wrong and was very intelligent for her age around people she didn't know. However, she was much more reserved. Tanda loved nothing more than writing, riding her bike, dancing in gymnastics, putting herself up to be in every school talent show. Younger sister Diamond was 3. She followed her older sister Tonda and mother around everywhere. Her sister Rita said she would jump from couch to couch and had bundles of energy. Tanda was fiercely protective of her little sister, and the pair had a very close relationship. On July 5, 2001, Tonda and Diamond's other 2 sisters, Rita and Victoria, left the apartment to stay with their grandmother for the night. Tracy stayed home with Tonda and Diamond. Allegedly also at the apartment was Washington, who spent the night there, too. They had all been planning a camping trip and were set to celebrate Victoria's birthday in a couple of days. The following morning, July 6, according to Tracy, she awoke before 6 a.m., kissed both of her girls goodbye before leaving for work at Robert Taylor Park, where she prepared lunches for children in a summer program. She said she left the apartment secure and locked, and Tonda was asked to watch over Diamond, and as always, was given strict instructions not to open the door to anybody. Washington also left with Tracy and dropped her off at work. Most reports state that Tracy and Washington left the apartment at around 6:30 a.m. Tracy used a phone at work to call the apartment sometime between 7 and 8 a.m., but the call went unanswered. She said she was concerned, but told herself her girls must have fallen back to sleep. When Tracy's shift finished just before noon, she returned to the apartment with Washington again after he had picked her up. She called out her daughters' names, but got no response. Tonda and Diamond were nowhere to be seen. Tracy panicked and asked Washington to help her look for the girls, but he left and drove away in his car. A small pile of clothes was left on the couch alongside a handwritten note. It was written by 10-year-old Tonda. The note said that she and Diamond had gone to the nearby school playground and a local store and would be back soon. Tracy said her girls would never have left the apartment without her telling them they could, and they wouldn't have opened the door to any unknown person. And the rest of the Bradley family agreed. Tracy said she searched for hours that day, panicking that if she phoned the police, she would be in trouble for leaving her children alone, and this may have resulted in her other girls being taken away. However, at around 6:30 p.m., 12 hours after she had last seen them, she called 911. She initially panicked and told the police that she had simply taken a nap and woken up to realize they were missing. But after more questioning, she told them that she had left them alone to go to work. At the time of the girls' disappearance, Tanda was enrolled in summer school classes at Diddle Elementary School, but school officials confirmed she was definitely absent that day. Several children in the neighborhood stated the sisters were seen playing outside their apartment at around 12 p.m. Other children told the police they saw the two girls at the school playground at around lunchtime. Authorities didn't fully feel these claims could be substantiated, however, and worried the children that said they saw the girls may have got the days and times confused. In the beginning of the investigation, a rotating crew of 100 detectives worked around the clock, searching everywhere from sewers and lagoons to abandoned buildings and factories. They questioned more than 100 registered sex offenders in the area, and more than 30 relatives were interviewed and then arraigned. Almost 1,000 tips came in. Psychics claimed to know the location of the girls' bodies, while other people said the girls were being held as sex slaves in a small town in Illinois. Another tip said that the man who some people think may be Tan's father, who was from Morocco, had kidnapped both girls and taken them overseas. But all of these leads went nowhere. Investigators believe whoever was involved knew the girls, and in turn, the girls trusted the person or persons implicitly. Their Aunt Faith agreed and said that Tonda would not have opened the door for a stranger. In Chicago in 2001, at the time the girls went missing, there had only been 5 cases of abductions at the hands of strangers within the 15 years prior. Statistically, and with all the information put together, many people just didn't believe it was a random abduction. One day, when Tracy was being questioned by Chicago police, a vital piece of evidence was brought to light. Tracy had left her phone with family members while she was speaking with detectives, and a few people decided to check her voicemail. A voicemail had been left on the phone by 10-year-old Tonda on the morning she and her sister had disappeared. On that morning, Tracy's cell phone wasn't with her. According to family members, it was with Tonda and Diamond's grandmother. It is understood that the voicemail said, "Mama, this is T-Mom, pick up the phone. George is at the door. Can I open?" the door. He said that we're going to Jules to pick up the cake there. We're coming to pick you up from work. This cake was for her sister Victoria's birthday. That was the following day. It is unclear whether Tanda was referring to George Washington or the family's neighbor George Sr., but George was the name heard on the recording by 10 family members. For unknown reasons, this voicemail would be lost. Whether it was deleted on purpose or simply not saved, the message T left no longer exists. A few days later, an image of two young girls resembling the pair was found on a surveillance video at the store named Jules that Tanda had spoken of in the voicemail. Police asked if Tracy could confirm whether it was her girls on the tape, but they were met with resistance from her. Tracy said she didn't believe it would be her daughters, despite not seeing the video. Tracy eventually agreed to view the footage, which was now in the hands of the FBI, but sadly, although very coincidental, it wasn't the missing pair. Difficult years later, Tracy Bradley's prayers have yet to be answered, but she keeps hoping as the search for her two missing daughters goes on. Good afternoon. I'm Antonio Mora and I'm Diane Burns. Now, there are no suspects, no new leads, and no clues to where T and Diamond Bradley might be. I talked to Tracy Bradley about her pain and a dream that haunts her yet offers her some hope 4 years later. My kids that have been missing, you know, for 4 years, and it's kind of hard. It's very hard. Bradley says, whoever took the girls also took a huge piece of her heart and her life. In your heart, though, you must wonder who would want to hurt you. I don't know. And it just hurts a lot, you know, and it's going to continue hurting until they return. Another key piece of evidence was the note left on the couch. One of the girls Aunt said the letter was Tan's penmanship, but truly in my heart, I think she was coached into writing that letter. When she wrote letters or certain words, she wouldn't spell it correctly. So, this didn't match up with her writing. Other family members said that if Tanda had wanted to tell her mother something, she would have just called her cell phone, not left a note. T's school provided handwriting samples. And the FBI said to the best of their knowledge, Tanda did write that note. But questions surrounding whether or not Tanda wrote it of her own accord and free will are still being asked today. Washington was interviewed by police within the first few days of the investigation. It is said he did this voluntarily and agreed to his home and vehicle being searched. Several hairs were found in the trunk of his Lincoln. Forensic testing concluded that these hairs could have belonged to either Tanda, Diamond, or Tracy. But the lack of clarity surrounding whose hairs they were, and when the hairs got there meant there was little the police could do. As well as the hairs, Washington also had a receipt from Home Depot showing that shortly before the girls went missing, he had made some questionable purchases. Gloves, garbage bags, and bleach were all purchased at the same time, and authorities in some of the Bradley family deemed this to be suspicious. Washington also had a criminal record for burglary and soliciting prostitution. Authorities stated that Tracy was uncooperative regarding her daughter's disappearances. She did not allow police to talk to her other two children, Rita and Victoria, and she refused to give a handwriting sample to use as a comparison to the note that was found on the couch. In 2002, Tracy reportedly shoved a police officer who requested that she accompany him to the station to discuss new leads in the case. Authorities also said that Tracy missed several scheduled appointments with detectives. Tracy's spiritual advisor told the media that officers had violated her rights by forcibly taking her to the precinct. Authorities argue that Tracy was physically combative and they needed to restrain her. Tracy did take a polygraph test shortly after. Tanda and Diamond disappeared, which she passed. And although police said her actions and changing stories were suspicious, she was never named as a suspect in her daughter's disappearances. Tracy moved away a few years after her girls went missing and changed her phone number. She still holds vigils for her daughters and says, "I know in my heart they're still alive." T and Diamond's sister, Victoria, said that Tracy had 2 more children. After the girls disappeared and these siblings knew nothing about Tanda and Diamond. Victoria and Rita said they had to explain to them that they had 2 other sisters and that they were missing. "We can't grieve. We can't heal. We're just in limbo." That state of numbness drives Shalia Bradley Smith in her relentless search for Tanda and Diamond Bradley. No one should have to live with not knowing. If there was a funeral, you could grieve, but you can't grieve if you don't have a body. The girl's great-aunt, Shalia Bradley Smith, said several years ago that she got in touch with the family that now has the phone linked to the number that Tracy used to have. She wanted to let them know about the girls just in case T ever dialed the number that used to be hers. Shalia has been a huge driving force in keeping the case in the public eye and has many thoughts on it, too. She believes that Washington had something to do with the disappearance of her great-nieces. She also believes that Tanda and Diamond actually went missing on July 5th, not the 6th. Tracy disagrees with Shalia and doesn't believe that Washington is involved. Tracy kept her an-off relationship with him going and went on to have a son with him whom Washington took custody of. A private detective named James Miller jumped on board the case and worked free of charge to help the family. He started traveling far and wide in his search for the girls. In 2007, an email was sent to Shalia. Part of the email read, "This is T." They linked this email to a MySpace page. On the page, there was a photo of a girl that bore a strong resemblance to the age-progressed photos of Tanda. When some of the children in the family saw the photo, they even asked if they had finally found her. A forensic artist named Lois Gibson was given 3 pictures from the MySpace page to compare against images of T from 6 years earlier. Gibson didn't want to build up any false hope for the family, so was initially looking for signs that it wasn't her. But Gibson said, "I went over every feature and went, oh my God, it's her." Sadly, the IP addresses and associated details did not link anything to Tanda Bradley. The hope of the family came crashing down even more when a man came forward and said the girl in the photo was his daughter, and through DNA this was confirmed. In 2013, Shalia received another email. The sender lived in Gary, Indiana. She said in the email she needed to clear her conscience. She said on the morning the girls had disappeared, her boyfriend was unaccounted for. Later that evening when he turned up, he was visibly shaken and distressed. He told her that he had done something messed up and stated she saw it. "I had to kill her." These details were passed on to the police, who made contact with the sender. Police remained very tight-lipped about this tip. For unknown reasons, the sender, once cooperative, suddenly stopped engaging. with the police and no longer wanted to give information. In 2017, private investigator James Miller, who had dedicated so many years to trying to find the girls, passed away after a battle with cancer. T and Diamond's family were devastated and didn't feel it would be as easy as someone simply carrying on his behalf due to the amount he had personally put into the case. It's been 18 years since Diamond and T. Bradley went missing. In part because their family has kept their disappearance in the public eye, holding yearly vigils on this date, hoping that one day the tip will come and that finally brings them home. The sisters' disappearance is still one of Chicago's biggest unsolved mysteries. Lord, we thank you. Lord, we thank you. And yet, it's a mystery their family refuses to let go of, gathering as they do year upon year on this date to remember them. Their story kept in the public eye to remind people that Diamond and Tand were never found, in the hopes that someday someone with knowledge of what happened to them will break their silence. I can go out on a limb and say, yeah, we have a pot on the stove, but the pot on the stove, in order to get it cooking, we need the gas. And there's somebody out there that has that information that we're considering to be the gas to get this criminal prosecution or give us information on where these girls at. The information is out there. Detective Ed Carroll, a Chicago police veteran for 26 years, worked the case on and off until his retirement in 2013. He said, almost every case I've ever worked, especially the violent crimes, you're always able to either include someone or exclude someone. And this was the only case I worked in my entire career where I couldn't exclude anyone or include anyone. In 2019, Shalia posted on the missing Diamond and Tonda Bradley Facebook page pleading for the girls to come home. Shalia said a woman responded saying, "We're trying." Through a series of messages, Shalia said she went on to say that she was Tanda and that she and Diamond have been together this entire time, that they both have kids and Diamond is in college. The woman was willing to take a DNA test to prove she was Tonda. New hope in the case of two Chicago sisters who have been missing for almost 2 decades now. Diamond and Tonda Bradley were last seen near their South Side apartment back in 2001. Well, recently a woman contacted their family with a surprising claim. Here's John Garcia with a story that's new at 4.30. She pretty much said that she's T and she showed me pictures of some children that one is supposed to be hers and the other one is supposed to be Diamond. A woman in Texas goes by the name Lily Rodriguez on Facebook. She communicated with me earlier today when I asked if she is Tonda Bradley. She said yes. She does not say whether she is going to get a DNA test, but asked me not to contact her anymore. She went on to say that she was Tonda, that her and Diamond have been together all this time. They both have children. Diamond is in college. So I was asking questions about, birthmarks, scars, what happened, how did you end up there? I think she detected that I was skeptical and she got a little upset. She did, she says. And to you of all people said, "No, this is me." But this was nothing more than a cruel hoax. Every year the family holds a vigil on the anniversary of their disappearance to honor the girls and hopefully spark more interest in the case. Story 6. Tuesday, May 3, 2016. Margaret Hammond makes the call that is every parent's worst nightmare. Her daughter Natalie has been missing for 48 hours. Natalie had been at Margaret's house a few days prior, and she hasn't heard from her daughter since. What's the specific concern that's called you to phone the police? The operator asked him, said Margaret. 31-year-old mother of three, Natalie Hemming lived on Alderney Avenue in Milton Keynes, England with her partner Paul. She had her eldest daughter Kirsty with a previous partner, and she had two more children with Paul, a 6-year-old boy and a girl who was 3. Paul and Natalie had been together since 2007. One of Natalie's sisters, Joanne, described her as very loud and outspoken, but kind and caring in equal measure. Her family all said that her children were her life, and anything she could do to help people, she would. Family and friends of Natalie not only didn't believe she'd have left without telling anyone or left without her children, but they felt that something much darker had happened. They all believed her partner Paul would be at the center of whatever it was. Everyone that knew Natalie told the police that Paul was mentally and physically abusive, controlling, manipulative, and possessive, and had been since the start of the relationship. Just a few months into the pair dating, Paul had become violent. He once drove her to a woods where he beat her and broke her nose. He embarrassed her and talked down to her in front of friends and family, once even spitting in her face in front of everyone. He made her sleep naked on the bedroom floor, and whenever she turned around or tried to get up, he would kick her. Paul had promised to marry Natalie, but called off the wedding 3 times. Natalie went as far as buying her dress, booking the venue, and inviting guests before Paul can lead all the plans without telling her, leaving her absolutely humiliated. Amidst all the cancellations, Natalie changed her surname and took Paul's by way of a compromise. But after years of abuse, Natalie had geared up the strength to leave Paul twice. Once in 2010 and then again 3 years later. Her sister Joanne said she had it all planned. She was going to move into her own place with the children and was excited about starting a new life. "I'm really going to do it this time," she told us. In 2013. With the relationship getting worse, she took her 3 children and went to live in Yorkshire close to her sister. Over the next few months, Natalie started to rebuild hers and her children's lives and start afresh. But she moved back in with Paul 4 months later, and her family were devastated. And in 2016, 3 years later, Natalie Hemming was now missing. What followed was one of the biggest searches in the history of the Thames Valley Police. One of Natalie's close friends said that Natalie had texted her in the weeks before she had disappeared. She told her that she had ended it with Paul for good, and she had met someone at work called Simon, who totally doted on her. Natalie's friend told her to be careful, but Natalie assured everyone that the relationship with Paul was finally over. They had both agreed to end it amicably, and she was finally moving on. Paul had even started looking for flats to move into, and she was looking at other places to live with the children. Sunday afternoon, April 30th. Natalie drove to her mom's house and dropped off the children before getting picked up by Simon for their very first date. Later that evening, Natalie and Paul's baby girl wasn't settling down, so Margaret rang Paul to come and pick her up. When he arrived, he noticed that Natalie's car was still parked on the street, but Natalie wasn't in the house. He asked where she was. Natalie hadn't said where she was going, so Margaret assumed that she had been picked up with friends to go for a drink. Natalie and Simon were seen out on their first date before leaving the following day on May 1st. They seemed happy and content, and the pair sent messages to each other later that day. Natalie went back to her mother's house to collect her children in her car, and they all headed back to Alderney Avenue. Simon messaged her on WhatsApp just before 5 p.m. The message was delivered in red, but Natalie didn't respond. Later on, he sent 2 further messages, checking to see if she was okay. These messages were delivered, but never opened. Margaret began ringing Natalie, too, but got no answer. Margaret decided to go to the house that she shared with Paul. Paul told her she'd gone to spend time with some friends, but her car was still in the driveway, and Margaret instantly felt that something was wrong. After this conversation with Paul, she rang 999 and reported her daughter missing. Following this, the police went straight to Natalie and Paul's home just after midnight. One of the officers asked to have a look at Paul's phone, but he said he needed to keep it with him in case Natalie called. They then asked to do a routine search of the house, which Paul also pushed back on. Paul said that Natalie had been away the previous day, and upon her return to the house, she said she needed some time alone. She gave no indication as to where she was going, but she left the family home, and that was the last time he had seen her. 6 a.m. May 4th, the morning after she was reported missing. Following an evasive interview with Paul, the police placed him under arrest. As he was leaving the house, he turned to officers and said, "Have you found Natalie then?" Well, if I recap first on Natalie's disappearance, she was last seen on Sunday after going to visit her mom in Hemel Hempstead. She's not been seen since then, and that's why there is so much concern over her welfare. Natalie is a mom of 3. She, as I say, lives in Milton Keynes, and she's not been in contact with any member of her family since. She's not touched her bank accounts, and detectives here today say that is ringing alarm bells. We are extremely concerned now about Natalie. She hasn't been in contact with her children. She hasn't been in contact with her family. She hasn't turned up at work. These are all the normal things that we would have expected her to have done. Paul was interviewed, as was his and Natalie's son. Their 6-year-old son said he had heard a noise in the night that was so loud it sounded like thunder and smashing glass. He snuck downstairs and peered through a gap in the door where he saw his mom lying down, covered in a blanket, and his dad was cleaning something up. Not wanting to get into trouble for being out of bed, he hurried upstairs and went back to sleep. He then innocently made a passing comment to the child protection officers. That alarmed them even more. He said the red rug in the living room had wet patches on it and his dad had taken it to work to clean it, but the rug hadn't returned. He drew a diagram for the police of the living room and pointed out where he'd seen everything. We'll move on to the account of Evan. Evan said he went downstairs when he heard the noise and peeked through a gap in the door. He thought it was Mom being sick. He said it was really loud, like thunder, and it sounded like 3 glasses smashing. He described the big red rug in the lounge had been missing. Have you removed a rug from your house recently? No comment. And if so, why? No comment. Following this, Paul's car was seized and the police made more appeals. We found a red rug. Now, this rug is missing from Natalie's house and I believe it's very significant in relation to her disappearance. Now, my appeal today is for anybody who has seen a rug or similar rug discarded anywhere, particularly within Alsbury into Oxford, Milton Keynes over into the border of Bedfordshire. That scene that has picked it up, moved it to come forward and speak to us. During another interview with Paul, he made a shocking claim. He said that he had been home all day on Sunday when Natalie had returned that evening. She was acting oddly and wasn't her usual self. She then confessed to Paul that she had met up with someone from work and gone back to his house. She then said she had been raped by this man and needed space to process everything. Paul said he then went to bed at around 9 p.m. and when he got up the next morning, Natalie was gone. But police knew from looking at the messages between Simon and Natalie, this just didn't match up with what Paul had claimed. Despite Paul saying he hadn't left the house all day that Sunday, his car was picked up at around 10 p.m. that night, driving miles away from their house. It's automatic number plate recognition. You've told us that you did not leave your house Sunday night into Monday. Correct. Your car does leave the house. What was your car doing out at that time? No comment. What you're saying is that I have killed my partner. I've disposed of her body. I have tidied the house, made it look pristine. Managed to cook them dinner and many more things without them knowing. That's exactly what we're saying, Paul. Impossible. Okay. And at exactly 8 p.m., I'll conclude this interview. A forensic search of the house found blood on some of the furniture in the living room and in the boot of his car. Paul had said that the blood was probably from himself or Natalie accidentally cutting themselves on something. Mobile data analysis confirmed that Natalie's phone showed no activity from the 2nd of May onwards and her digital footprint was totally non-existent. With all the information the team had now gathered, police knew that Natalie was no longer alive and the investigation was escalated from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Looking at the timeline of events, they knew that Paul had killed Natalie on Sunday evening, May 1st. They believed that she had returned that day and told Paul she was now seeing Simon. Following this, in a jealous rage, Paul had beaten her to death in the living room, which was partially heard and seen by their son before he wrapped her body up and drove out to hide her late that night. Paul returned to the family home where the children were still sleeping. When the kids got up the next morning, Paul told them their mother had left the house in the night. He then took the children to Whipnade Zoo for a bank holiday day out. At 9 p.m. on May 6th, he was charged with the murder of Natalie Hemming. But police still needed to find Natalie's body, and Paul was giving nothing away, refusing to tell anyone where she was. Everyone believed that this was the last bit of control he was trying to cling onto. In woods near Milton Keynes, police searched for a missing mom of 3. Natalie Hemming was last seen on Sunday, May 1st. Her partner, Paul Hemming, who's 42, is charged with her murder. Police have widened the search to Bedfordshire and Oxfordshire with nearly 50 detectives working on the case. 3 weeks after she had been reported missing, human remains were found 30 m away in a wooded area called Chandler's Cross by a man who had been out mowing a meadow. It was later confirmed that these were the remains of Natalie Hemming. A pathologist said it was impossible to say what exactly had caused her death because of the state of decomposition, but she did have a skull fracture and a fracture to her left arm. At the start of what would be a 9-day trial, Paul pleaded not guilty to murder and instead tried to make a plea of manslaughter. He said that they had grappled with one another during an argument about her new relationship, and he'd hurled a heavy ornament at her. He said he didn't aim it at her head, but it struck her there accidentally, causing her to fall onto the rug and stop breathing. He said he knew she was dead, and then in a state of panic, he said about covering up what he'd done. But the police didn't accept his plea of manslaughter and instead pushed on with the trial to try and obtain a conviction for murder. In November 2016, everyone got what they had been hoping for. A jury unanimously found Paul Hemming guilty for the murder, and he was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. Upon his sentencing, officers in the courtroom saw Paul turn to Natalie's mother and sisters and mouth, "I loved every minute." His children have no direct contact with him. Joanne is raising Natalie's two girls, and Carrie is raising her son. Joanne is now an ambassador for advocacy after fatal domestic abuse. They support family and friends who have lost a loved one through domestic violence. Kirsty, Natalie's oldest daughter, later spoke out about the brutal way her stepfather had treated her and her siblings. She took part in a documentary called Behind Closed Doors, Through the Eyes of a Child. And she was one of 4 children that bravely spoke out about the domestic abuse they had witnessed or experienced and the effect of living in such a frightening home. She is also the patron of a charity called Operation Encompass, which helps protect children from the effects of domestic violence. Kirsty has said she is a much more confident and strong person now and wants to continue to raise awareness and carry on being her mother's voice. Story 7. The 25th of June 1983, Helena, Montana. In a remote part of the Helena National Forest in the Elkhorn Mountains, just off Warm Springs Creek Road, members of the Capital City Radio Club had got together to enjoy a picnic and some time in the great outdoors. The scenery was beautiful. A shallow river ran through the area and a group of children were playing down by the water. One of those children was Niall K. Marshall. Niall was 4 years old and had been born on September 18, 1978 to parents Nancy and William, who got divorced not long after. Nancy remarried Kim Marshall, who adopted Niall. Kim said she was an angelic child, just the sweetest little girl you could meet. She was at the picnic with Nancy, Kim, her older brother, and little sister. It was turning out to be a lovely day, but it would end with so many unanswered questions and a lifetime of heartache. The children had gone down to the creek to play and Neeleen had gone with them. When they all started to come back, Neeleen wasn't there. She had been playing with 2 older children while the other kids explored a nearby abandoned cabin. The 2 had walked ahead of Niall, but when they turned around, she was gone. People were calling out her name and went looking down by the water, but she was nowhere to be found. As panic began to rise, everyone tried to hold on to the hope that she was somewhere nearby, but there was nothing. There was no trace of her anywhere. Law enforcement were called in and before long, massive search and rescue operations were underway. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office knew that the area was going to be a big challenge. So, they drafted in the Lewis and Clark search and rescue teams, and helicopters using heat-sensing devices were also deployed. Over the days that followed, nearly 3,000 searches were carried out. 2,800 volunteers, including Many members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of which the family were members of, were out in force, combing through the area. Many of them didn't even know the family. They just wanted to help in any way they could. Dogs and planes were also used to comb through the area alongside those who were searching on foot. The FBI were soon drafted in, and divers were deployed to look in the mine shafts and bodies of water in the area. They even drained a pond, believing that maybe she had got too close and fallen in, but draining it turned up nothing. They hunted day and night for her, but none of these hunts yielded any results. How had a little girl simply vanished with no trace at all? As she was barefoot, she likely wouldn't have been able to get very far. She hated walking without shoes. She was only 4 years old, so the idea of her walking off for miles seemed highly unlikely. A description of her was issued. She was 3 feet 2 inches, weighing 29 pounds. She had brown hair, blue eyes, a small mole above her left eyebrow, and dimples on both of her cheeks. She was barefoot, wearing a yellow shirt and shorts. The surrounding area and terrain of the Alorn Mountains was challenging for the most experienced of visitors to the forest, with mine shafts, dense woodland, and steep rocky cliffs. For a 4-year-old girl, it didn't even bear thinking about. One of those who joined in the search was Ken Gardner, who emotionally remembered how frantic the search was. "I can actually kind of feel it right now. I just got kids of my own," he recalled. He also talked about how they had conducted the grid searches. "Stretch your hands out, so my arm out to your arm out to his arm." Huge areas of grid searches. Ralph Dunzo was then with the Lewis and Clark County Search and Rescue, and he was a key member of the search efforts for a long time. And even somewhat today. "That search still haunts me." He said the searches had now been going on for 5 days and they had been extremely difficult. The terrain was challenging and the rain made it even more so. Ralph said, "I think about after day 5 with the elements and the potential of dangerous critters out on the hillside. It kind of came into our minds that we may not have a successful end to this. But they were not going to give up." Volunteers, in spite of the dangers, continued to arrive each and every day to pick up where they left off. Nobody could bear the idea of Nile being out in the wilderness by herself. Searchers went through the area on their hands and knees, praying they would find anything and holding on to the hope that she had simply wandered off and become lost. A search dog named Duke was also brought in to help. Duke had helped find 37 people and there were hopes that he would be able to find Nile. He did pick up a scent but lost it soon after. Then some of the children who had been playing down by the creek and catching frogs with Nile told her mother something that would take the case in a whole new direction and would force everyone to consider a sinister new possibility that Neeline had been abducted. 2 girls had walked past her as she sat on the rocks by the beaver dams on Warping Creek. They said they saw a man dressed in a purple jogging suit. They said he was strange. He walked out from behind the trees and went straight over to Nile. Nile was reportedly heard saying, "My brother can run faster than you." One of the girls said she didn't recognize this man and didn't think he was one of the group who had come together for the picnic. According to Nancy, another child had seen him take a step closer to Nile. The next day, another child said the same thing. The man was in a jogging suit and had apparently spoken to two other children and Nile. A 6-year-old boy told the police that Nile had said, "That man wants me to follow the shadow." One of them said they ignored the man and carried on walking. The other child said they were frightened, so decided to leave. Nile stayed standing with him, and within a few seconds both of them were gone. What made what these children had said even more worrying was that they hadn't spoken to each other after Nile went missing. This wasn't a story they had concocted or come up with together. They were saying this independently. This new information changed everything. Nancy and Kim now believed Nile had been abducted. And so, to get her face and name out there, they issued thousands upon thousands of missing persons posters across the country, hoping that someone would see them and know something. Plenty of reported sightings and tips came in from all over the United States, but none of them could be corroborated. After 10 days of searching on the 4th of July, as the snow was starting to fall, the search for Neeleen Marshall was called off. For people like Ralph, who had put in such effort, it was devastating. "We did everything we thought we could do, but we weren't successful," he said. The Marshalls were questioned about what had happened and what they had seen that day, a normal procedure when investigating a missing child. It was later reported that the tactics used had upset the family greatly. "An FBI agent told me point blank, 'You killed your daughter.' Nancy went completely nuts, and I was taken aback, especially since we had fought to get the FBI's help," Kim said. Nancy was stunned when an agent reportedly said, "She's dead. Get over it." But Nancy was not prepared to give up or get over it. She wanted to find her daughter and bring her home. The Marshalls were also asked to send over various photographs of Nile, her siblings, and Nancy as a child. And devastatingly, these photos would all be destroyed in a lab fire. A composite sketch was drawn up, and there were several people it reportedly resembled, including a man wanted in connection with the kidnap and murder of a child. After the sketch went out, the apartment of a suspect was searched and a photograph of a young girl was found. She looked like Nile, but after an investigation, it was determined to not be her. This was yet another lead that went absolutely nowhere. As the months passed, with still no sign of Nile Marshall, her case continued to grow colder. All of those involved were left in a state of limbo. How can you begin to move on when such a huge piece of your heart is missing? That would all change the following year. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had been founded the year before by several advocates, including John and Rebecca Walsh. John and Rivy's 6-year-old son, Adam, had been abducted from a department store in Florida and murdered. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was formed to provide a nationwide and coordinated response when children are reported missing or being exploited. One arm of their organization was a telephone line. November 27, 1985, a call came through. The caller was anonymous and wouldn't identify themselves. He said that he was Nile Marshall's kidnapper and he still had her. This was extremely concerning. Even if it was a hoax, it needed to be thoroughly investigated. No stone could afford to go unturned. This would also not be the last they would hear from this man. 2 months after the call, Child Find received an anonymous letter appearing to be from the same person. It said in part, but what on earth could a motive have been if they didn't want money for her return? When you eliminate the request for ransom, if money is not a motive, it must be to have a child of your own, said Special Agent Neil Patel. The letters also made references to acts of sexual abuse he had committed against Nile. But in his mind, as he wrote, he never molested her in any other way. This man said he was taking good care of her, but during the same phone conversation or same letter that he would write, he would also make reference to things that he was having Nile do, which would be sexual abuse, said Tim Campbell of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. The letter was postmarked from Madison, Wisconsin. D.N.E. County Detective Kevin Hughes said he was privy to things that a normal person would not have access to. Over the next 6 months that followed, more phone calls were made and more letters were received. All I could tell them was that she is okay. I hope Child Find can get the following back to her family. I picked Kay up on the road in the Elkhorn Park area between Helena and Boulder. She was crying and frightened, and as I held her, she was shaking, and I decided I would keep her and love her. I took her home with me. I have a nice investment income and I can work at home, so I care for her myself all the time. I teach her at home and she likes to go with me when I travel. Her hair is short and curly now and she has really grown. She is about 45 in and around 50 lb. She has all 4 of her permanent upper and 2 of her lower incisors at this time. She takes a bath and brushes her teeth every day. She would gladly recount to you trips to San Francisco, New York, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Nashville, Chicago, Puerto Rico, and Canada. We were even in Britain for a month last year and she loved it. Nobody questions passports. His letter said that he no longer used her first name, Nile, but rather her middle name, Kay. He also said that his little sister and parents had been killed in a car accident when his sister was only 9. At around the same time the letters were received, Nancy and Kim also began receiving phone calls. The calls were coming from a public phone booth in Madison, Wisconsin, with Special Agent Kent Miller of the Madison FBI office saying there were about 3 calls. The letters had been traced to the same area. The FBI determined that the calls and the letters were from the same man. They were even able to find the exact phone booth the man had called from. But after this, there were no more phone calls. They abruptly stopped. Like everything else in this case, this promising lead was now obviously going nowhere. And the truth that had felt so close now felt further away than ever. Nancy said what this man said in his letters tied with the numerous sightings of her daughter across the states. If they were traveling, maybe some of those sightings had been legitimate. In June 1989, Nile's uncle saw a composite sketch of a man and a woman wanted for child abduction. He believed that on the first day of the searches for his niece, he saw this couple in amongst the people there. In November 1990, an episode of Unsolved Mysteries would feature a segment on Neileen's case. It would also show an HP progressed image of what she could have looked like at the age of 12, how old she would have been when the episode went out. One viewer who watched the episode got in touch. He thought that one of his classmates was Nile. It wasn't, but this tip would close another child abduction case. Monica Bonilla had been abducted by her non-custodial father, Guillermo. After this tip was called in, she was found alive and finally returned to her mother after 8 years of being missing. 42-year-old Richard James Wilson had been on probation since 1984 for the sexual assault of a minor. He would then talk to Livingston police. He said he had not only murdered a woman from Great Falls, but he also said he had killed Nile Marshall. He told the police where they would find the remains of the woman, but they didn't find anything. They then took him to the Alorn Mountains to give him the opportunity to show them where Neeleen was, but yet again, it led to nothing. He couldn't tell them where a specific mine shaft was that he had spoken about. So, the police decided to search the mine shaft that was closest to the one he had described. Nothing was there. Wilson did have a history of mental illness, and he would later walk back what he had said. Jefferson County Sheriff Tom Dorn said that his confession needed to be taken with a grain of salt due to the fact his story kept changing. The decision was made to release him. There was not enough evidence to hold him, Lewis and Clark County Attorney Mike McGrath said. The Marshalls would later move to Japan as Kim had to work out there, and then they would be moving to Mexico. In 1995, Nancy flew out to Mexico by herself to have a look at houses. And when it was time for Kim and the children to leave for Mexico, they all headed to the airport, excited to join Nancy. Their lives would then be turned upside down once again. Nancy had been found in her hotel room in Mexico City. The door had been kicked in, and she was found hanging with her hands tied behind her back. She had also been badly beaten and her wedding ring had been stolen. It was initially determined that she had taken her own life, but Kim was not having it. He hired a private investigator due to the lack of development in his late wife's case. She went to her hotel room that night and was not awake in the morning. Nye's sister Mickey said, "I suspect murder." Kim said the State Department told him not to push for a murder inquiry as this could mean his wife's body would not be released. Kim was sure Nancy had been murdered, but he wanted her body back. So, he decided not to push further. Nye's body was flown home and she was buried in Texas. Flash forward to 1998. The episode of Unsolved Mysteries that featured Neeleen's case was on television again, and one of the people tuning in was a nurse from New Orleans. It immediately piqued her interest. She remembered something odd that had happened to her at work a couple of years prior. A woman calling herself Helena had come into the hospital with a man as she was due to have a baby. As with all hospital admittances, there were questions. What were their names? What was her medical history? What was their address? But these were questions they clearly were uncomfortable answering. Before the staff knew it, they were gone. The FBI were able to track this woman down, and when they did, she said she couldn't remember much about her upbringing, but she thought her mother's name was Nile. Blood was drawn to compare to Nile's biological father. And despite this being a promising lead, it was yet another dead end. "I guess I've had my hopes up on this," Tim Campbell from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department said, "but sometimes when you have something really good that stands out, it turns out not to be so good." Various age-progressed images have been released over the years showing what she could have looked like at age 25, 33, and 43. No trace of Nile Marshall has ever been found, not even the clothes she was wearing. Walk into the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and you walk past a 3-decade-old mystery. My gut tells me she's deceased. on a sunny Saturday afternoon in June back in 1983. 4-year-old Nile Marshall vanished from a ham radio picnic in the Alorn Mountains. We have went back to the area where she went missing. We still have no solid leads. Searchers pushed into the night. It became even more intense in terms of the priority and the need to find this young child before dark. I can kind of actually feel it right now. I just got kids of my own. Ken Gardner was one of those volunteers. Archive news clippings detail the efforts of him and hundreds of others. By now, you're cold and the weather's bad and you've lost this hope that you're going to find her. At least find her alive. But you also get this maybe today. Maybe there's something today. Derek Vanlin worked on the case when he was with the Montana Division of Criminal Investigations. You know, she's out there and not been found, and it's something that nobody has answers to at this point. The case has become a favorite topic of internet sleuths on chatboards and websites. And we kind of look at this too, just to kind of see what's out there, and we check the internet. For the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, the case remains open. We ran cadaver dogs through there for body parts. We had an excavator that we dug up a lot of spots with. If Niles' body remains in the mountains above Boulder, after 33 years, there may be little left to find. But some still have hope and have not stopped looking. Whenever I'd hunt or chase cattle in that part of the country or something, my eyes were always looking for yellow. As the years have passed by, the case of Nile Marshall has been the subject of much discussion and debate. Sheriff Doolittle said, "I probably would say somewhere around 2 inquiries a month. If somebody has seen something or somebody has heard something or somebody has a question or somebody will send something to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, it's always out there." For those who are part of the searches, the theories about what happened to her are many and varied. I think she was abducted and sold and will probably never know her real identity, said Ralph Dunzo. Ken Gardner said he thinks she is still alive. For the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, the case is still open and will remain so until they have answers. Nylene is listed on the Missing Persons Clearinghouse website, which is a real-time list compiled with information from the FBI about a person and their case. Clearinghouses are a network basically between states. So if we have a case that crosses state lines, we can contact the clearinghouse manager in another state and we work together to try and locate the missing people, said Jennifer Vitz of the Montana Department of Justice. As soon as an agency enters a missing person record into the FBI missing persons file, some of that information is posted to the website. The search for Nylene was the biggest the area had ever seen. For her family, the agony of not knowing and not having answers was unbearable. Her older brother, who was 6 when she went missing, told his mother that his heart wanted to cry. "I really miss Nylene," he said to Nancy. "I really love her, and I want to play with her. Do you think we'll ever find her?" Nylene's little sister was just under 2 at the time, and she loved playing with dolls with her. According to Nancy, when Nylene went missing, her sister had trouble eating and sleeping, and she didn't want to play with dolls anymore. Law enforcement have returned to the scene many times over the years. No evidence has ever been found. In 2018, the Find Nile Marshall Facebook page made a post. It said that handwritten letters had been sent to Businesses in Janesville, Indiana food, and Edgerton, Wisconsin relating to Nile Marshall. They were postmarked from Cincinnati, Ohio with no return address. The Post said they were being investigated by law enforcement. It has now been 41 years since Nile Marshall went missing. As with all unsolved disappearances, there are so many questions that we will likely never have the answers to. Had Nile become lost and succumbed to the elements, or had she been the victim of something much more calculated and sinister? Were those letters and calls cruel hoaxes, or were they actually truthful? If she was abducted, a 4-year-old might have been told a story by somebody, and this man might have taken her as his own, and she believes that's her father when in reality, she was abducted. Detective Hughes said, "The only thing that we can hope is that with the passage of time, anyone who knows anything might come forward and bring some much needed closure to this case." As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper. Thank you for joining me here at Mr. Night Cared. True Crime Stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware. Even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night, let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.